Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I am 32 years old. This happened in June 2024. The swamp at night is a different world. Everything familiar dissolves into shadows, and sounds travel in ways that defy logic. What seems close might be miles away, and what sounds distant could be right behind you. I should have remembered that before agreeing to this trip. It'll be an adventure, my girlfriend Ellie had said, her green eyes sparkling with that familiar excitement I'd fallen for 3 years ago. We've been talking about doing something spontaneous for months. This is our chance. I couldn't argue with her logic. Our relationship had fallen into comfortable routines. Work, takeout, Netflix, sleep, repeat. Both of us trapped in corporate jobs that drained our souls day by day. When her college friend Mara invited us for a weekend kayaking trip in Louisiana's Honey Island swamp, it seemed like exactly what we needed. What I didn't expect was for everything to go so catastrophically wrong. The drive from our home in Atlanta took almost 8 hours. Ellie chatted excitedly while I drove, reading aloud from a guidebook about the swamp's ecosystems and wildlife. "Listen to this," she said, tapping the page. "Honey Island Swamp is one of the most pristine swamplands in the United States. It's also home to the legendary Honey Island swamp monster." I glanced at her. "The what now?" "The Honey Island swamp monster," she repeated with a grin. "Locals call it the Wookiee of the woods. Supposedly, it's 7 feet tall, covered in matted gray or brown hair, with yellow eyes and a horrific smell." "Sounds like my college roommate," I joked, but something about the description made me uneasy. I'd never been one for cryptids or ghost stories, but there was something about swamps that naturally invited such tales. All that hidden water, the constant decay, the impenetrable thickets, it was the perfect breeding ground for nightmares. Ellie laughed and continued reading. "It says here that in 1963, a man named Harlan Ford claimed to have discovered strange footprints out there, 3-toed tracks over 9 inches long." "Probably just a deformed alligator," I said. "Or maybe," she lowered her voice dramatically, "it's the result of an alligator mating with a chimpanzee." I snorted. "That's not how biology works, Al." "I'm just reading what it says here. Apparently, that's one of the local theories." She flipped the page. "Others think it might be the descendant of a train crash from the early 1900s. A traveling circus was passing through, and after the crash, some of the chimpanzees supposedly escaped into the swamp. And then they mated with alligators? This is getting less scientific by the minute." "Don't be such a skeptic," she nudged my shoulder playfully. "That's Mara's territory." Mara Chen had been Ellie's roommate in college. Unlike Ellie, who majored in communications, Mara had pursued a degree in biology and now worked as a field researcher for a conservation organization. This trip was partially for her work, something about cataloging native plant species, and partially a chance for the old friends to reconnect. "What's her boyfriend like?" I asked. "Jason. I've only met him a couple times. He's nice, kind of quiet but smart. They've been together about a year now." I nodded, feeling a flutter of anxiety about spending 3 days with people I barely knew. But Ellie was excited, and that was enough for me. We arrived at the small town of Pearl River just after 4 in the afternoon. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the earthy smell of water and vegetation. Mara and Jason had already checked into our motel, a weathered single-story building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. Mara greeted Ellie with an enthusiastic hug, then turned to me with a warm smile. She was petite, with straight black hair cut in a practical bob, dressed in khaki shorts and a moisture-wicking shirt that seemed better suited to the climate than my jeans and cotton tee. "Daniel, good to see you again," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "This is Jason." Jason Wakefield was tall and lanky with sandy blonde hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He nodded at me with a slight smile. "Good trip down." "Not bad," I replied. "Traffic was light." "We've got adjoining rooms," Mara said, handing us a key. "We'll head out early tomorrow morning, so get some rest. There's a diner across the street if you're hungry." Our room was basic but clean. 2 queen beds, we'd be sharing with another couple joining us tomorrow, a small bathroom, and an ancient air conditioner that rattled but miraculously produced cold air. After washing up, we met Mara and Jason at the diner, a local spot called Alligator Annie's that featured taxidermied wildlife on the walls and checkered tablecloths. "Kyle and Becky should be here around midnight," Mara said as we studied the laminated menus. "They're driving in from Houston after work." "They're the other couple, right?" I asked. Mara nodded. "Kyle's a photographer, wildlife stuff mostly. He's hoping to get some shots for a magazine piece." "What about Becky?" Ellie asked. "Pharmaceutical sales," Jason replied. "She travels a lot for work, but she grew up around here. That's how Kyle found out about Honey Island." The waitress, a middle-aged woman with bleached blonde hair and a name tag that read Doreen, approached our table. "Y'all ready to order?" We placed our orders. I went with the catfish special, and as Doreen walked away, I noticed her giving us a strange look. "Something wrong?" I asked. Doreen hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "Y'all headed into the swamp?" "Yeah," Mara replied. "We're kayaking tomorrow. 3-day trip." Doreen's expression tightened. "Which part?" "Eastern section," Jason said. "We're putting in at Crawford Landing, heading up toward Dead River." Doreen's face paled slightly. "Dead River? That area's been having some troubles lately." "What kind of troubles?" Ellie asked. Her interest piqued. "There've been disappearances," Doreen said in a lowered voice. "2 fellas went fishing out there last month. Only one came back, and he wasn't right in the head afterward. Kept talking about voices in the water." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Every small town had its spooky stories, especially ones that relied on tourism. "Probably got lost and dehydrated," Jason said practically. "Hallucinations are common with severe dehydration." "Maybe so," Doreen conceded, though she didn't look convinced. "But that doesn't explain the others." "Others?" Mara asked. "There have been 3 more cases this year already. People going missing. The sheriff's department says they're just accidents. Folks not respecting the swamp. But locals know better." She glanced over her shoulder, then back at us. "You seem like nice kids. If I were you, I'd stick to the western trails. Or, better yet, take a guided tour instead." "We'll be careful," Mara assured her. "I've done extensive fieldwork in environments like this." Doreen sighed. "Just stay on the marked waterways and whatever you do, be back before dark. Nothing good happens in Honey Island after sunset." With that ominous warning, she walked away to place our orders. "Well, that was suitably creepy," Ellie said with a small laugh. "Think she gets a commission from the guided tour companies?" "Probably," I agreed, though I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Jason leaned forward. "The disappearances are real, actually. I read about them when researching the area, but they're most likely alligator attacks or people getting lost. The swamp's nearly 70,000 acres." "Precisely," Mara nodded. "Nature demands respect, but we're well prepared. We've got GPS, emergency beacons, and I've studied the waterway maps extensively." The conversation shifted to logistics. What time we'd start, what to pack, the route we'd take. By the time our food arrived, Doreen's warning had faded to the background of my mind. The catfish was delicious, fried to perfection with a side of hush puppies and coleslaw. As we ate, an elderly man at the counter kept glancing our way. He was thin and weathered, with leathery skin that spoke of decades in the sun. When we finished our meal, he approached our table, moving with the careful gait of someone with bad knees. "Heard y'all talking about heading into Honey Island," he said without preamble. His accent was thick, pure Louisiana bayou. "That's right," Mara replied. The man, Claude, according to the patch on his worn denim shirt, pulled up a chair without asking and sat heavily. You might want to reconsider Dead River. That area ain't been right lately. What do you mean? Ellie asked. Claude scratched his stubbled chin. I've been fishing those waters for 60 years, know every bend and bayou. But something's changed this past year. The wildlife acts different. Frogs gone quiet. Birds don't sing like they should. Environmental changes can impact wildlife behavior, Mara said, her tone respectful but skeptical. Claude shook his head. This ain't about pollution or climate or whatever. This is something older. He leaned in closer. You all ever heard of Latiche? We all shook our heads. Latiche is what the old Cajun folks call it, the child of the swamp. Legend says it was once a human baby, abandoned in the marsh. Instead of dying, it was raised by alligators, became something not quite human anymore. I had to work hard not to laugh. An alligator-raised human, like a Louisiana Tarzan? Claude didn't smile. Mock if you want, son. But Latiche ain't the only thing in those waters. The swamp holds secrets. Old secrets. He turned his gaze to each of us in turn. If you go, stay together. Don't wander off alone, even for a minute. And whatever you hear calling in the night, don't answer. With that cryptic warning, Claude stood and shuffled back to the counter, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Well, Jason finally said, at least the local color is entertaining. We laughed, breaking the tension, but I noticed Ellie's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Kyle and Becky arrived just after midnight. Kyle Fisher was stocky and bearded with an easy smile, while Becky Landry was striking, tall and athletic with copper hair pulled back in a ponytail and freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks. Despite the late hour, they were full of energy, excited about the trip. I've been trying to get shots of the swamp for years, Kyle said as we helped them bring their gear in from their SUV. The light there is supposed to be incredible at dawn. And I've been telling him he's crazy for years, Becky added with an affectionate eye roll. Her accent had the musical quality of someone who grew up in southern Louisiana. But when I heard y'all were going, I figured I'd better come along to keep him from becoming gator food. We stayed up another hour, going over final preparations before finally turning in. I fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the long drive, but my dreams were unsettled, full of dark water and watching eyes. Morning came too quickly. We were up before dawn, loading our gear into Mara's SUV and Kyle's vehicle. The air was already warm, promising a hot day ahead. We stopped at a local bait shop to pick up our rented kayaks, sleek two-person vessels that Mara had reserved in advance. The shop owner, a grizzled man called Bobby, helped us strap the kayaks to our roof racks. "Y'all headed to Crawford Landing?" he asked. "That's right," Mara confirmed. Bobby nodded. "Water's high from the rain last week. Currents might be stronger than normal." "We'll be careful," Jason assured him. Bobby studied our group for a moment. "You folks know the rules of the swamp." "What rules?" Ellie asked. "Don't feed the wildlife, don't leave trash, don't take nothing but pictures." He paused. "And don't go where you ain't welcome." Before we could ask what he meant by that last part, he turned away to help another customer, effectively ending the conversation. The drive to Crawford Landing took about 20 minutes, the road gradually narrowing as we left civilization behind. The launch point was a simple concrete ramp leading into the dark water, with a small parking area that already held a few trucks with empty boat trailers. We unloaded efficiently, each person responsible for specific gear. The plan was for me and Ellie to share one kayak, Mara and Jason another, and Kyle and Becky in the third. We'd packed light but thoroughly: tents, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, water purifiers, first aid kits, GPS devices, and emergency beacons. Kyle also had an impressive array of camera equipment protected in waterproof cases. The morning sun was just beginning to filter through the cypress trees as we pushed our kayaks into the water. Despite my earlier misgivings, I had to admit the swamp was beautiful. Shafts of golden light pierced the canopy overhead, illuminating patches of mist that hovered above the dark water. Spanish moss hung like silver-green curtains from ancient trees, and the air was alive with the sounds of birds and insects. "Ready?" Ellie asked from her position at the front of our kayak. I nodded, dipping my paddle into the water. "Ready." Mara took the lead, her kayak cutting smoothly through the still water. Kyle and Becky followed, with Ellie and me bringing up the rear. The main channel was wide and relatively straight, bordered on both sides by cypress trees growing directly from the water, their knobby knees protruding like strange sculptures. "This is magnificent," Ellie called back to me, her voice hushed with awe. It was. Despite the humidity and the occasional clouds of mosquitoes, there was something primordially beautiful about the swamp. We paddled steadily, following the main waterway for about 2 hours before Mara signaled for a break. We guided our kayaks to a small, muddy island dotted with cypress trees. "This is one of our checkpoints," she explained as we stretched our legs. "We'll rest here, then head northeast toward the Pearl River, following it for about 4 miles before we reach our first campsite." We refilled our water bottles, applied more insect repellent, and snacked on trail mix and energy bars. The island, though small, was teeming with life. Dragonflies hovered above reeds, tiny lizards darted through the undergrowth, and overhead, a great blue heron watched us with studied indifference. "Hey, come look at this," Kyle called from the edge of the island. He was crouched down, examining something in the mud. We gathered around him. Pressed into the soft earth was a footprint, large, at least 15 inches long, with what appeared to be 3 distinct toe impressions. "What made that?" Ellie asked, her voice tinged with unease. "Alligator, probably," Mara said, though she frowned as she studied it, though the shape is unusual. "Could be a deformed gator," Jason suggested, echoing my earlier theory. "Or maybe a large water bird with an unusual gait. Or," Kyle said with a grin, "it could be the Honey Island swamp monster." "Shut up," Becky nudged him. "Don't even joke about that." "You believe in that stuff?" I asked her, surprised. Becky's expression turned serious. "I grew up hearing stories. My grandfather claimed to have seen it once back in the 70s. Said it moved through the water like it was born to it, faster than any human could swim." "What did it look like?" Ellie asked. According to him, it was tall, covered in grayish hair, with eyes that reflected red in his flashlight beam. Becky shrugged. "Could have been anything. A bear, an escaped ape from a zoo, or just an old man's imagination. But something made those stories start." "Stories start because people need explanations for things they don't understand," Jason said. "It's basic human psychology." "Maybe," Becky conceded, "but my grandpère wasn't a man given to flights of fancy, and he never went back to that part of the swamp again." "Which part?" Mara asked. "Dead River," Becky said quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group, broken only by the distant call of some unseen bird. "Well," I finally said, "good thing we've got safety in numbers, right?" Everyone laughed, though it sounded forced. We returned to our kayaks and continued our journey, the mood slightly subdued. The main channel gradually narrowed, forcing us to paddle single file through passages where cypress trees grew so close together that their branches formed a tunnel overhead. The GPS showed we were making good time, but as we progressed deeper into the swamp, I noticed subtle changes in our surroundings. The birdsong that had been so prevalent earlier had diminished, replaced by an oppressive silence occasionally broken by the plop of something dropping into the water or the far-off bellow of an alligator. "Is it normal for it to get so quiet?" I called to Mara, who was about 20 feet ahead. "Animals often go quiet when humans pass through," she replied. "They'll start up again once we're gone." That made sense, but something still felt off. The water had changed too. darker now, almost black in places, with an oily sheen on the surface. And there was a smell, subtle but pervasive, like rotting vegetation mixed with something metallic. We stopped for lunch on another small island, this one rockier and higher than the previous one. As we ate our sandwiches, I noticed Becky kept glancing nervously at the water. "Everything okay?" I asked her. She hesitated. "Probably nothing, but I could swear something's been following us for the last mile or so." "Following us?" Ellie repeated. "Like what?" "I don't know. Just something moving in the water. Never close enough to see clearly." "Alligator, most likely," Jason said matter-of-factly. "They're curious but generally shy around humans." "Maybe," Becky said, but she didn't sound convinced. After lunch, we continued northeast, eventually reaching the Pearl River, which was wider and had a noticeable current. The paddling became more challenging, especially for Ellie and me, who had the least experience. By late afternoon, my shoulders and back were aching from the effort. Just as I was about to suggest another break, Mara called back. "Campsite ahead." She directed us toward what appeared to be a substantial island rising from the swamp, a true patch of terra firma with enough elevation to stay dry even if the water rose. A crude wooden dock protruded from the bank, weathered but sturdy enough to tie up our kayaks. The campsite was clearly established, a cleared area with a stone fire ring and even a rudimentary wooden platform where we could set up our tents away from the damp ground. There were signs that others had used the spot recently: trampled grass, a half-burnt log in the fire pit, and a small stack of cut firewood under a tarp. "This is perfect," Kyle said, already unloading his camera gear. We established camp efficiently, each person falling into assigned tasks. Kyle and Becky set up the tents while Mara and Jason collected and purified water. Ellie and I gathered additional firewood and prepared dinner, a one-pot camping stew that would be hearty after our long day of paddling. As dusk approached, we sat around the small fire, eating and sharing stories. The forest around us came alive with night sounds: frogs, insects, and the occasional splash from the water. It would have been peaceful if not for the growing sense of unease I couldn't shake. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Ellie asked suddenly, voicing what I'd been thinking. There was a moment of silence as everyone instinctively scanned the trees surrounding our small clearing. "Just the wildlife," Mara said confidently. "We're visitors in their home." "I don't know," Becky said. "It feels different, like there's something specific out there." Jason sighed. "Between Doreen, Claude, and Bobby's warnings, we've all got the creeps. It's just suggestion." "Suggestion doesn't make footprints," Kyle pointed out. "One unusual footprint doesn't mean there's a monster in the swamp," Jason countered. "Let's change the subject," I suggested, noticing Ellie's increasing discomfort. "What's the plan for tomorrow?" Mara pulled out her waterproof map. "We'll continue along this section of the Pearl River for about 2 miles, then take this tributary east." She traced a thin blue line with her finger. "That will eventually lead us to Dead River by midday." "Why's it called Dead River?" Ellie asked. "It's not actually a river," Jason explained. "It's more of a large, still body of water connected to the main waterways. The water moves so slowly there that early settlers thought it was stagnant. Hence, dead. It's also where they used to find bodies," Becky added quietly. We all looked at her. "According to local stories," she continued, "during Prohibition, bootleggers used the swamp for smuggling. Rival gangs would sometimes dump their enemies there, knowing the bodies might never be found." "Well, that's cheerful," I said, trying to lighten the mood. Kyle put his arm around Becky. "Maybe we should tell ghost stories while we're at it." "No thanks," Ellie said quickly. "I'd rather talk about literally anything else." We shifted to more pleasant topics: our jobs, funny college stories, future travel plans, but the earlier unease had settled over the camp like a fog. When we finally retired to our tents, I found myself lying awake, listening to the night sounds of the swamp. Ellie pressed close to me in our shared sleeping bag. "Danny?" she whispered. "Are you awake?" "Yeah," I murmured. "Can't sleep? It's so loud out there." She was right. The nighttime swamp was a symphony of croaks, chirps, buzzes, and mysterious splashes. Yet underneath all that natural sound was something else, a kind of expectant silence, as if the swamp itself was holding its breath. "It's just nature," I assured her, not entirely convinced myself. "I keep thinking about what Claude said at the diner, about whatever calls in the night." I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Old man trying to scare the tourists." "Maybe," she yawned. "But still, don't answer any creepy swamp calls, okay?" "Promise," I said, kissing her forehead. Eventually, her breathing deepened as she drifted off to sleep. I lay awake longer, listening to the cacophony outside. Just as I was finally starting to doze, a sound cut through the night, different from the wildlife noises, distinct and unnatural. A long, low whistle, almost human, but not quite. I sat up, suddenly alert. The sound came again, farther away this time, as if moving. It carried a query, a question mark, like someone trying to locate another person. Whistle once for yes, twice for no, that sort of thing. From the tent next to ours, I heard movement, then the sound of a zipper being opened carefully. "Hello?" Kyle's voice, hushed but carrying in the night. "Is someone out there?" "Kyle," I called softly. "You hear that too?" More movement, and then Kyle's head poked out of his tent. "Yeah, sounds like whistling." "Could be another camper," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. "Maybe." He didn't sound convinced either. The whistle came again, closer now from the direction of the water. It had a plaintive quality, almost like someone in distress. Kyle reached back into his tent and emerged with a powerful flashlight. "I'm going to check it out." "Wait," I said, carefully extracting myself from beside Ellie, who mumbled in her sleep but didn't wake. "I'll come with you." I grabbed my own flashlight and joined Kyle outside. The night was thick with humidity, the air heavy in my lungs. Our small fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint red glow over the campsite. "Which direction?" I whispered. Kyle pointed toward the dock. "Over there, I think." We moved cautiously through the camp, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The whistle didn't come again, but as we approached the water, I heard something else. A soft splashing, like someone wading through shallow water. Kyle directed his light toward the sound. The beam reflected off the black water, revealing nothing but ripples spreading outward from an unseen disturbance. "Hello?" Kyle called, louder this time. "Is someone there?" No response, just another splash, farther out now. "Maybe it's an animal," I suggested. "A bird or something." Kyle shook his head. That whistle was too purposeful. He was right. Whatever had made that sound wanted to be heard, wanted to draw attention. "We should go back," I said, a chill running down my spine despite the warm night. "Wake the others." Kyle hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, okay." We turned back toward the tents, and that's when we heard it again. The whistle, now behind us from the direction of the water. But this time it wasn't alone. A second whistle answered from the trees on the opposite side of our camp, as if in conversation. We froze. "That's not good," Kyle murmured. A third whistle joined in, then a fourth, coming from different directions surrounding our campsite. Each had the same questioning quality, the same unnatural pitch that was almost but not quite human. "Wake everyone," I said urgently. "Now." We hurried back to the tents. Kyle went to rouse Jason and Mara while I ducked into our tent. "Ellie," I shook her gently. "Ellie, wake up." She stirred, blinking in confusion at my flashlight beam. "What's wrong?" "I don't know, but something's not right. We need to—" A scream cut through the night, high-pitched, terrified, and unmistakably human. It came from the direction of Kyle and Becky's tent. Ellie bolted upright. "What was that?" "Stay here," I ordered, already moving to the tent entrance. Outside, chaos had erupted. Jason and Mara were out of their tent, both holding flashlights. Kyle was shouting Becky's name, his voice frantic. "She's gone!" he yelled when he saw me. "She was right next to me, and now she's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" Mara demanded. "I went to check out a noise with Daniel," Kyle explained, words tumbling over each other. "When I came back to wake her, she wasn't in the tent." "Maybe she went to use the bathroom," Jason suggested. "Then whose scream was that?" I asked. No one had an answer. "Becky!" Kyle called into the darkness. "Becky!" The only response was the chorus of whistles now coming continuously from all around us, growing in intensity. Ellie emerged from our tent, her face pale in the flashlight beams. "What's happening?" Before anyone could answer, there was a crashing in the underbrush at the edge of our campsite. We all swung our lights toward the sound. Becky burst into the clearing, running as if the devil himself was behind her. Her clothes were torn, her face scratched and bleeding, her eyes wide with terror. "Run!" she gasped as Kyle rushed to her. "We need to run. Now." "What happened?" Mara asked. "What did you see?" Becky shook her head violently. "No time. They're coming." "Who's coming?" Jason demanded. Instead of answering, Becky grabbed Kyle's arm and started pulling him toward the kayaks. "We have to leave, please." The whistling had stopped. In its place was a new sound. A soft, rhythmic thumping, like multiple sets of feet hitting the ground in unison. Coming closer. "She's right," I said. "We need to go." "But our gear," Mara protested. "Leave it," I snapped, already heading for our tent to grab the essentials. My phone, wallet, the car keys. "This is ridiculous," Jason argued. "We can't just paddle out in the dark." Becky whirled on him. "They took my blood," she hissed, holding up her arm. In the flashlight beam, I could see a neat, precise cut along her forearm, still seeping red. They said it was just the beginning, that they needed more. That decided it. We grabbed what we could carry, flashlights, water bottles, phones, and hurried to the dock. The thumping sounds were closer now, and I thought I could see movement in the trees, shadows shifting in ways that didn't match the breeze. We untied the kayaks with fumbling fingers and pushed off from the dock. Without discussion, our original pairings reformed: Ellie and me, Mara and Jason, Kyle and Becky. In the confusion and darkness, we all instinctively paddled back the way we had come, toward the Pearl River and eventually Crawford Landing. The night was moonless, making navigation treacherous. Our flashlight beams barely penetrated the darkness ahead. Occasionally, the light would catch a pair of reflective eyes watching from the bank or a partially submerged log that could have been an alligator. "Stay close," Mara called from the lead kayak. "Follow directly behind me." We did our best, but the current was stronger at night, pulling us in unexpected directions. After about 20 minutes of hard paddling, I realized we'd become separated from the others. "Mara," I called. "Kyle." No response. "They can't be far," Ellie said from the front of our kayak, her voice tight with fear. "They were right ahead of us a minute ago." I reached for my phone to use as another light source, only to find it drenched with water. It must have gotten splashed during our hasty departure. Useless. "Do you still have the GPS?" I asked Ellie. She felt around the bottom of the kayak. "No, I think it's back at the camp." Great. We were lost in a swamp at night with only one flashlight between us. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Okay, let's think this through. The Pearl River has a current. If we find the main river and let it carry us downstream, eventually we'll reach Crawford Landing." "And how do we find the main river?" Ellie asked, her voice breaking slightly. That was the question. The swamp was a maze of waterways, especially in the dark. We could be paddling in circles for all I knew. "Listen," I said. "Moving water makes more noise than still water. We need to listen for the river." We fell silent, straining our ears. At first, all I could hear was the drip of water from our paddles and the distant chorus of frogs. Then, faintly to our left, a different sound. the gentle rush of water moving with purpose. "That way," I pointed. We changed course, paddling toward the sound. After a few minutes, the narrow channel we'd been following opened into a wider waterway where the current was indeed stronger. "This must be it," Ellie said with relief. "The Pearl River." "Let's hope the others had the same idea," I said, scanning the water ahead with our flashlight. We let the current do most of the work, using our paddles mainly to steer. According to Mara's earlier estimates, Crawford Landing should be about 5 miles downstream from our campsite. At our current pace, that meant at least 2 hours of paddling in the dark. We'd been going for maybe 30 minutes when Ellie suddenly gasped. "Danny, cut the light." "What? Why?" "Just do it," she hissed. I switched off the flashlight, plunging us into near-total darkness. It took my eyes a few moments to adjust, and when they did, I saw what had alarmed Ellie. Ahead of us, perhaps 100 yards away on the bank, pinpricks of light moved through the trees. Flashlights or lanterns, at least a dozen of them, moving with purpose. "People?" I whispered. "Maybe," Ellie whispered back. "But I don't think we want to meet them." She was right. After what happened at the campsite, any strangers in the swamp at night were suspicious at best, dangerous at worst. We let the current carry us, keeping as quiet as possible, paddles ready to steer us away from the bank with the lights. As we drew closer, I could make out silhouettes moving among the trees, human-shaped, but somehow off, their proportions not quite right. Then I heard the whistling again, that same questioning, not quite human sound, but now I could hear something else beneath it. Words, spoken in a language I didn't recognize. The voices were low and guttural, communicating in harsh, clipped syllables. "Danny," Ellie breathed, barely audible. "Look at the water." I followed her gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. The black water around our kayak was moving, not with the current or wind, but with deliberate, sinuous patterns as if something large was passing just beneath the surface. We held perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The disturbance in the water circled our kayak once, twice, then moved away toward the bank with the lights. As soon as it was gone, we resumed paddling, moving as quietly as possible. The lights on the bank continued parallel to our course, always keeping pace, never falling behind or surging ahead. "They're following us," Ellie whispered. "No," I corrected her, a horrible realization dawning. "They're hurting us." We needed to change direction, but the river was our only guide in the darkness. Without it, we'd be truly lost in the swamp. A splash ahead made us freeze again. A beam of light swept across the water about 50 yards in front of us, and I caught a glimpse of another kayak. "Mara? Jason?" I called softly. "Daniel?" Mara's voice, tense but controlled. "Stay where you are. We're coming to you." Their kayak materialized out of the darkness, Jason paddling strongly while Mara directed their powerful flashlight toward us. "Thank God," Ellie said as they pulled alongside. "Where's Kyle and Becky?" Mara's face was grim in the reflected light. "We got separated. We've been looking for them for the past hour." "What about the people on the bank?" I asked, nodding toward the lights that were still keeping pace with us. "We've been watching them," Jason said. "They haven't tried to approach, just observe." "What happened back at the camp?" I asked. "What did Becky see?" Mara shook her head. "We don't know. She was too frightened to explain properly." "We need to find them," Ellie said. "They could be hurt." "Or worse," Jason muttered. "Don't say that," Mara snapped. Then, more calmly, "Crawford Landing is our best bet. If they're following the river like we are, that's where we'll meet up." It made sense. We continued downstream, our two kayaks staying close together. The lights on the bank eventually fell behind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. The night seemed endless, but finally the eastern sky began to lighten. Dawn revealed a landscape that was both beautiful and eerie. Cypress trees rising from mist-covered water, birds beginning their morning chorus, everything painted in shades of gray and pale gold. It also revealed that we weren't on the Pearl River at all. "This isn't right," Mara said, consulting her compass. "The Pearl flows southwest. We're heading southeast." "So where are we?" Ellie asked. Mara's expression was troubled. "I think we're on one of the tributaries that feeds into Dead River." My stomach dropped. The exact place everyone warned us to avoid. "It doesn't make sense," Jason insisted. "We were on the Pearl. I'm sure of it." "The current," I realized. It was too strong, pulling us in the wrong direction. We must have taken a wrong turn in the dark. Mara nodded grimly. "And now we're exactly where we didn't want to be." "What do we do?" Ellie asked. "Keep going," Mara decided after a moment. "Dead River connects to Pearl River eventually. We'll just have to go the long way around." It wasn't ideal, but without detailed maps, we had little choice. We continued paddling, the rising sun burning off the mist and revealing more of our surroundings. The tributary widened, the current slowing until the water became almost still. The trees grew more densely along the banks, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the dark water. "This must be Dead River," Mara said, her voice hushed. It was easy to see how it got its name. Unlike the flowing waters of the Pearl, this place felt stagnant, trapped in time. The water was so still it reflected the trees perfectly, creating the disorienting illusion that we were suspended between two identical worlds. "Listen," Jason said suddenly. We all fell silent. "I don't hear anything," Ellie said after a moment. "Exactly," Jason replied. "No birds, no insects. Nothing." He was right. The morning chorus that had accompanied us earlier had gone silent. The only sound was the gentle drip of water from our paddles. "Something's not right," I murmured. As if in answer, a splash broke the silence ahead of us. Then another and another. Something moving through the water, coming our way. "Get ready to turn around," Mara said, her voice tense. Before we could react, a kayak rounded the bend ahead, familiar, orange with two figures inside. "Kyle," I called, relief flooding through me. "Becky!" They paddled toward us quickly. As they drew closer, I could see that Kyle looked exhausted, his face haggard. Becky sat rigidly in front of him, her back straight, her copper hair loose around her shoulders. "Thank God," Kyle said as they pulled alongside us. "We've been going in circles all night." "Are you okay?" Ellie asked. "What happened back at the camp?" Kyle glanced at Becky, who hadn't said a word. "She's not feeling well. We need to get back to civilization as soon as possible." Something was off about Becky. She stared straight ahead, her posture unnaturally stiff, and her skin. Even in the golden morning light, it looked too pale, almost gray. "Becky?" Mara leaned toward her. "Are you hurt?" Slowly, Becky turned her head toward us. Her movements were jerky, like a marionette controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. When her face came into view, Ellie gasped. Becky's eyes were different, the whites now yellowish, the irises enlarged and darkened to an amber color. Her features seemed subtly altered, as if the proportions of her face had shifted slightly. "I am well," she said, her voice flat and toneless. "We should continue." Kyle gave us a desperate look. "She's been like this since I found her. I think she's in shock." "We need to get her to a doctor," Jason said. "Crawford Landing," Mara agreed. "It's our closest exit point." "No," Becky said, the word sharp and sudden. "Deeper. We must go deeper." Kyle shook his head. "She keeps saying that. I've been trying to steer us back to the landing, but she fights me on it." "Becky," I said carefully, "what happened last night? What did you see?" She turned those strange amber eyes to me, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "I saw truth," she replied. "I saw what waits beneath. They showed me." "Who showed you?" Ellie asked. "The children of Latish," Becky said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They've been waiting so long. They're hungry." Kyle looked at us helplessly. "See what I mean?" She's not making sense. We need to split up, Mara decided. Jason and I will go with Kyle and Becky back to Crawford Landing. Daniel and Ellie, you two wait here. Once we get Becky to safety, we'll send help back for you. What? No way, I protested. We're not separating again. It's the fastest solution, Mara insisted. Kyle's exhausted, and Becky clearly needs medical attention. 4 people paddling against the current will be much slower than 2. She's right, Jason added. We'll move faster with fewer kayaks, and we'll make sure help comes for you. I didn't like it, but the logic was sound. Fine, but be careful. You too, Mara said. Stay put, don't explore. We'll be back with help as quickly as we can. We watched as they turned their kayaks around and began paddling back the way we had come, Mara taking the lead, followed by Kyle and Becky, with Jason bringing up the rear. Just before they disappeared around a bend, Becky turned to look back at us. Even at a distance, I could see those strange amber eyes fix on us, her lips curving into a smile that was nothing like the friendly grin she'd worn when we first met. Then they were gone, leaving Ellie and me alone in the eerie silence of Dead River. I don't like this, Ellie said, echoing my thoughts. Something's very wrong with Becky. Shock, maybe, I suggested without conviction. Or some kind of swamp fever. Did you see her eyes? Ellie shuddered. They weren't human, Danny. I had no answer for that. We guided our kayak to the bank, finding a relatively dry spot where we could wait. The sun was fully up now, the day already growing hot and humid. We had a single water bottle between us, a few granola bars Ellie had stuffed in her pocket during our hasty escape, and my now useless phone. Not ideal, but we'd only have to wait a few hours if Mara's estimate was correct. What do you think happened to Becky? Ellie asked as we sat on a fallen log, rationing our water. I don't know, I admitted, but whatever it was, it terrified her. And now she's different. Ellie hugged herself despite the heat. Danny, what if it happens to us too? It won't, I said firmly. We'll be out of here soon. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. The heat and humidity grew more oppressive, and the silence remained unbroken by any natural sounds. No birds, no insects, not even the plop of a fish jumping. By noon, I was getting worried. They should have reached Crawford Landing by now. Maybe it's taking longer to organize help, Ellie suggested. Maybe, I agreed, not wanting to voice my growing concern that something had happened to them. We waited another hour, finishing the last of our water and granola bars. The sun beat down mercilessly and sweat soaked our clothes. My mouth was painfully dry, and I could see Ellie was feeling the effects of dehydration too. Her lips cracked and her cheeks flushed. We can't stay here, I finally decided. We need water, and I don't trust the swamp water without purification tablets. So we go after them? Ellie asked. I nodded. Following the way they went should lead us back to the Pearl River, and from there to Crawford Landing. We returned to our kayak and pushed off from the bank. The going was harder now, paddling against the subtle current, our arms already tired from the night's exertions. But we made steady progress, retracing our path back toward the main river. The day wore on, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. We should have reached the Pearl River hours ago. I was beginning to suspect we had somehow missed it, taken another wrong turn in the maze-like waterways. Danny, Ellie said suddenly, her voice tight with fear. Look. Ahead of us, something large moved through the water, creating a V-shaped wake that headed directly for our kayak. I frantically paddled to change direction, but whatever it was adjusted its course, still coming for us. Faster, I urged, digging my paddle deep into the water. The thing was gaining on us, the wake growing larger. I braced for impact, expecting at any moment to feel teeth or claws ripping into our kayak. Instead, the wake disappeared just before reaching us. Whatever had been making it had gone underneath us. For a moment, nothing happened. Then our kayak jerked violently, nearly capsizing. Something had grabbed it from below. "Hold on," I shouted as we tilted precariously. Ellie screamed as she was thrown forward, nearly going over the side. I lunged to grab her, and in that moment of distraction, our kayak was flipped completely, dumping us both into the dark water. The shock of it drove the breath from my lungs. The water was surprisingly cold for June and murky. I couldn't see more than a few inches in any direction. I kicked hard, fighting my way back to the surface. I broke through with a gasp, spinning around frantically. "Ellie! Here!" Her voice came from a few yards away. I swam toward her, relief washing over me as I saw her treading water. Our overturned kayak floated nearby. I grabbed it, pulling it toward us. "Can we flip it back?" Ellie asked, coughing up water. "Let's try." Together, we managed to right the kayak, though most of our meager supplies were now lost to the swamp. Climbing back in was awkward and nearly capsized us again, but eventually we managed it, sitting soaked and shaken in the now water-filled bottom of the vessel. "What was that?" Ellie asked, her teeth chattering despite the heat. "I don't know," I admitted. "Alligator, maybe?" "Too big," she said, "and alligators don't grab boats." I had no better explanation, so I said nothing, using my hands to paddle since we'd lost both our proper paddles in the capsizing. The sun was now low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the water. We needed to find our way out before dark fell again. After another half-hour of painful progress, the waterway widened suddenly, and I realized we'd finally reached the Pearl River. The current here was stronger, flowing in the direction we wanted to go, southwest, toward Crawford Landing. "Thank God," Ellie breathed. "Now we just follow this downstream." The relief was short-lived. As dusk approached, an unnatural fog began to rise from the water, thick, white tendrils that curled around our kayak and obscured our vision. Within minutes, we could see no more than a few feet in any direction. "Stay in the middle of the river," I instructed, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "The current will take us where we need to go." The fog grew thicker as darkness fell, and with it came that eerie silence again, the absence of any natural sound that had characterized Dead River. We were floating blind, at the mercy of the current and whatever might be hiding in the mist. Time became meaningless. Minutes stretched to hours as we drifted, occasionally steering with our hands to avoid obstacles we could sense rather than see. My clothes had dried somewhat, but I was still cold, and I could feel Ellie shivering beside me. Then, through the fog, I caught a glimpse of light, a warm, steady glow that suggested habitation. "Look," I pointed, "could be Crawford Landing." We used our hands to paddle toward it, hope giving us renewed strength. As we drew closer, the fog thinned slightly, allowing us to make out the silhouette of a dock and what appeared to be a cabin set back from the water. "Hello," I called as we approached. "Is anyone there?" No answer, but the light remained on, a beacon in the darkness. We reached the dock and I climbed out first, helping Ellie up after me. Our legs were stiff from hours in the kayak, and we staggered slightly as we made our way toward the cabin. It was a small structure, weathered but solid, with a single window glowing yellow from what appeared to be an oil lamp inside. The door was ajar, creaking slightly in the faint breeze. "Hello," I called again, pushing the door open wider. "We need help. Our friends." The words died in my throat as we stepped inside. The cabin consisted of a single room, sparsely furnished with a table, a chair, and a narrow cot. On the table sat the oil lamp we'd seen, casting flickering shadows on the walls. But it was what hung on those walls that turned my blood to ice. Photographs, dozens of them, covering every available surface. And in every photo was the same face, Becky's face, but with those strange amber eyes that had so disturbed us earlier. The images appeared to span decades, from yellowed, vintage snapshots to what looked like recent digital prints, but the face remained the same, unchanged. "Danny," Ellie whispered, clutching my arm. "What is this?" Before I could answer, the door slammed shut behind us. We whirled around to find Becky standing there, but not the Becky we'd met in Atlanta. This Becky stood taller, her posture unnaturally rigid, her copper hair hanging lank around a face that seemed longer, more angular than before. Her amber eyes glowed in the lamplight, the pupils vertical slits like a cat's. "You weren't supposed to be here yet," she said, her voice no longer human, deeper with a wet, gurgling quality. "The others haven't finished preparing." I pushed Ellie behind me, backing away until we hit the wall of photographs. "What did you do to our friends?" Becky's mouth stretched into a smile that was too wide, revealing teeth that were sharper than they should have been. "Your friends are fine. They're exactly where they need to be." "Let us go," I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "People know we're out here. They'll come looking." "Of course they will," Becky agreed, still with that terrible smile. "They always do. That's how we feed." "We?" Ellie whispered. As if in answer, a low whistling sound came from outside, that same questioning call we'd heard the night before. Becky's head cocked at an impossible angle, listening. Then she whistled back, a perfect mimicry of the sound. "The family is coming," she said, turning those inhuman eyes back to us. "Letitia's children are hungry." I looked frantically around the cabin for a weapon, something to defend ourselves with. The chair, I could break it, use one of the legs as a club. As if reading my thoughts, Becky moved with blinding speed, crossing the room and grabbing my throat with one hand. "My name is Daniel Mercer, and I am 34 years old. This happened in July 2024. The Honey Island swamp had always been a place of fascination for me. Growing up in New Orleans, I'd heard all the stories. Tales of the legendary Honey Island swamp monster, ghostly lights dancing above the murky waters, and people who ventured in but never ventured out. As a wildlife photographer specializing in wetland ecosystems, I'd always wanted to document the mysterious swamp's hidden corners, places tourists never reached, places where, as the old-timers said, the veil between worlds grew thin. "You sure about going in there alone, Danny?" My sister Emma's voice crackled through my phone as I finished loading gear into my kayak at the small, deserted boat launch near Pearl River. "The weather reports showing storms later this week." "I'll be fine," I assured her, wedging my weatherproof camera case between my camping supplies. "I've done solo trips before. Besides, I've mapped everything out. 5 days, 4 nights. I'll document the eastern basin that borders the Pearl River Wildlife Management Area. It's swampy, but not impossible." "It's not the swamp I'm worried about," Emma sighed. "It's you being out there with no backup. Cell service is spotty at best." I cinched down the last of my dry bags. "I've got the satellite messenger for emergencies. I'll check in every night, okay? If I miss a check-in, you can call in the cavalry. Just be careful. Those swamps don't forgive mistakes." I promised I would be, ended the call and slipped my phone into a waterproof pouch. As I pushed off from the gravel shore into the slow-moving water, the morning sun was just beginning to burn through the mist that hung over the swamp like a burial shroud. My kayak glided silently through the water, barely disturbing the glass-like surface. The first few hours were peaceful, meditative even. I navigated through stands of towering cypress trees draped with Spanish moss that swayed like phantom limbs in the gentle breeze. The drone of cicadas and chorus of frogs created nature's soundtrack as I photographed herons picking their way delicately through the shallows and alligators sunning themselves on half-submerged logs. By mid-afternoon, I'd traveled deeper into the swamp than I'd initially planned. The waterways had become a confusing maze of narrow channels winding between islands of swamp grass and cypress knees. The GPS on my phone showed I was approaching the eastern edges of the basin, near the boundary of the Wildlife Management Area. I found a small island with relatively dry ground and decided to make camp. The air was thick with humidity as I set up my tent, sweat plastering my shirt to my back. After securing my kayak, I unpacked my cooking supplies and prepared a simple dinner of dehydrated camping food. As dusk fell, the swamp transformed. What had been merely atmospheric during daylight became oppressive in the growing darkness. The sounds changed too. The cheerful daytime chorus gave way to eerie hoots, distant splashes, and rustling noises that seemed to come from all directions and none at once. I sat beside my small camp stove, the blue flame casting strange shadows among the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After dinner, I activated my satellite messenger and sent the promised all-clear message to Emma. Then I climbed into my tent, zipped the mosquito netting securely, and tried to sleep. Dreams came quickly, unsettling dreams of sinking into black mud that pulled at me like hands, of yellow eyes watching from the darkness, of whispers in a language I couldn't understand but somehow recognized. I woke suddenly in the pitch black, heart hammering against my ribs, convinced I'd heard someone call my name. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. Nothing answered but the swamp itself, the chorus of frogs, the buzz of insects, the occasional splash of something entering the water. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m., the witching hour. I laughed nervously at my own superstition and tried to go back to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. So I lay awake until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees. The second day, I pushed deeper into the swamp, following a route I'd mapped that would take me through some of the most remote areas. The weather held, though the skies had begun to gather a threatening murkiness that promised the storms Emma had warned about. Still, I figured I had another day before they hit. Around noon, I discovered something unexpected. A dilapidated wooden structure barely visible through the trees on a slightly elevated piece of ground. I paddled closer, curiosity piqued. It appeared to be an old trapper's cabin, the wood weathered to a silver gray, partially reclaimed by the swamp. Vines climbed the walls, and part of the roof had caved in, but it was unmistakably man-made. I secured my kayak and approached cautiously, camera in hand. The door hung askew on rusty hinges, creaking as the breeze pushed it gently back and forth. Something about the place made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, but I dismissed it as the natural unease of finding human habitation in such an isolated spot. "Hello," I called out, not really expecting an answer. "Anyone here?" Silence greeted me, so I stepped through the doorway. The interior was dim, the only light filtering through the holes in the roof and the single dirty window. It took my eyes a moment to adjust from the bright sunlight outside. The cabin consisted of a single room with the remains of crude furniture, a broken table, a chair missing a leg, the rusted frame of what had once been a bed. In one corner stood a small cast-iron stove, thick with rust, but it was what adorned the walls that made my blood run cold. Dozens of crude figures hung from nails, dolls made of twisted sticks bound with what looked like human hair, feathers, and strips of leather. Each had a face fashioned from clay or wax, expressions frozen in silent screams. Between them hung desiccated animal parts, the skull of a raccoon, the preserved foot of an alligator, the wings of a heron spread in a macabre display. My hand trembled as I raised my camera to document this bizarre discovery. As I framed the shot, I noticed something scratched into the wall behind the figures. Symbols, dozens of them, carved deep into the wood. They reminded me of West African veve I'd seen in books about voodoo practices, but these seemed older somehow, more primitive. I was so absorbed in photographing the symbols that I nearly missed the small leather-bound book lying on the floor near the stove. It had been partially obscured by debris, but something about it caught my eye. I picked it up, brushing away years of dust and dirt. The cover bore no title, just a symbol similar to those on the wall, a crude representation of something that might have been human but wasn't quite. I opened it carefully, half expecting the brittle pages to disintegrate in my hands. They held firm, though yellowed with age. The contents were handwritten in faded ink, some pages in French, others in English, and some in a language I couldn't identify. Dates at the top of some entries suggested the journal, for that's what it appeared to be, dated back to the 1920s. I couldn't read much of it, but phrases jumped out. The thing came again last night. They are not human anymore. The swamp takes what it wants, and most disturbingly, it wears their faces but cannot hide what lies beneath. A sudden noise outside made me jump, nearly dropping the book. It sounded like a branch breaking under someone's foot. I slipped the journal into my waterproof bag and moved cautiously to the door, peering out. Nothing seemed out of place. My kayak still rested where I'd left it. The swamp carried on its timeless existence, indifferent to my presence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that in finding this cabin, I had somehow announced my presence to the swamp in a way that my quiet paddling had not. I decided to push on. The cabin had unsettled me more than I wanted to admit, and I preferred to make my next camp somewhere else. Back in my kayak, I consulted my map and GPS, plotting a course deeper into the basin. As I paddled away, I glanced back once at the cabin. For just a moment, I thought I saw movement at the broken window, a pale face watching me depart. I blinked, and it was gone. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, though I couldn't dispel my unease. Several times I caught myself scanning the shoreline, searching for what? I wasn't sure. By late afternoon, storm clouds had begun to gather in earnest, and I decided to make camp on another small island with a stand of pines that would offer some protection from the coming rain. As I set up my tent, I discovered my satellite messenger was missing. I frantically searched through all my gear, but it was nowhere to be found. Had I left it at the cabin? No. I was certain I'd packed it that morning. Could it have fallen out during the day's journey? Possibly, but I'd been careful with my equipment. The implications were serious. Without the messenger, I had no reliable way to contact the outside world. My phone showed no service, as expected. I was truly alone now. The storm broke just after sunset. Not the gentle rain I'd hoped for, but a ferocious southern thunderstorm that transformed the swamp into a maelstrom of wind-whipped trees and pounding rain. Lightning split the sky every few minutes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. I huddled in my tent, grateful for the waterproof fabric as rain hammered against it like vengeful fists. Between thunderclaps, I thought I heard other sounds, splashing that couldn't be attributed to the rain, and once, what sounded horribly like laughter, high and wild. I told myself it was just the wind, or my imagination working overtime. The storm had me on edge, that was all. Around midnight, the storm began to abate, the thunderclaps moving farther away, the rain softening to a steady patter. Exhaustion finally overcame my anxiety, and I drifted into uneasy sleep, the journal from the cabin tucked safely in my sleeping bag beside me. I dreamed again, vivid, terrifying dreams. I was running through the swamp at night, pursued by something I couldn't see but could sense behind me, always just a few steps away. The ground kept giving way beneath my feet, plunging me into cold, black water. Each time I surfaced, gasping for air, yellow eyes watched from the darkness, drawing closer. In the dream, I finally reached my tent, diving inside and zipping it shut as if the thin fabric could protect me. Relief washed over me, until I realized I wasn't alone in the tent. Something was breathing in the darkness, something that smelled of rot and stagnant water. As I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand touched cold, wet skin that wasn't my own. I woke with a start, my heart racing. Rain still pattered on the tent, but the thunder had stopped. The silence that followed seemed unnatural, too complete. Even the insects and frogs had fallen quiet. Then I heard it, a sound outside my tent. Not the rain, but a deliberate sound. The soft squelch of footsteps in mud, circling my tent slowly. Around and around they went, never stopping, never speeding up or slowing down. Just a steady, methodical circuit. My mouth went dry. The rational part of my brain suggested it could be an animal, perhaps a raccoon or even a deer curious about this foreign object in its territory. But some deeper, more primitive part knew better. Whatever circled my tent moved with purpose. I remained frozen in my sleeping bag, scarcely daring to breathe as the footsteps continued their relentless circuit. My flashlight lay just inches from my hand, but I was afraid to move, afraid that any sound would provoke whatever stalked outside. And then the footsteps stopped, directly in front of the tent flap. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, slowly, something pressed against the fabric, not a hand or a paw, but something larger, as if a body were leaning against the tent. The material dimpled inward, straining. A voice spoke, so close it might have been inside the tent with me. "Daniel." It wasn't a question. The voice was wet, as if spoken through a mouthful of liquid, with a thick Cajun accent. "We've been waiting for you." I couldn't respond, terror closing my throat. How did it know my name? "You found the old place," the voice continued. "Found a book. That means you belong to the swamp now." The pressure against the tent increased, the fabric stretching alarmingly. "Nah." Another voice joined the first, different, higher, but with the same unnatural wetness. "Not yet. The old woman say bring him." "The old woman can come get him herself," the first voice growled. "You know she can't leave the place," the second voice responded. "Not since what happened." They fell silent, but the pressure against the tent remained. My hand inched toward my flashlight, fingers finally closing around the cold metal. Before I could think better of it, I clicked it on, aiming the beam at the tent wall. The silhouette projected against the fabric wasn't human. The proportions were wrong. The head too large and misshapen, the arms too long. For a moment it remained perfectly still, caught in the light. Then it moved with shocking speed, retreating from the tent. I heard splashing, then silence. I sat up, trembling so violently I could barely hold the flashlight. Had I imagined it all? A nightmare bleeding into wakefulness? But I knew I hadn't been asleep when the voices spoke. They had been real as the rain still falling outside. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat up, flashlight in one hand, the knife from my cooking kit in the other, waiting for dawn. When it finally came, gray light seeping through the tent fabric, I emerged cautiously. The ground around my tent was a mess of mud and shallow puddles from the night's rain. And there, circling the tent, were footprints. Not animal tracks, but not quite human either. They were roughly foot-shaped but too large, with elongated toes that ended in what looked like claws. They led away from my campsite toward the water where they disappeared. I broke camp with shaking hands, determined to get back to civilization as quickly as possible. The journal from the cabin felt like a burning coal in my bag, but something wouldn't let me leave it behind. I needed to understand what was happening, what I'd stumbled into. As I loaded my kayak, I realized the sky was still heavy with clouds. The storm had passed, but another was brewing. I needed to move fast if I hoped to outrun it. I consulted my map and GPS, plotting the quickest route back to the boat launch where I'd started. To my dismay, I realized I'd traveled much farther than intended. The most direct route would take me past the cabin again. The thought made my skin crawl, but any detour would add hours to my journey. I set off, paddling with renewed urgency. The swamp seemed different now, hostile where before it had been merely indifferent. The cypresses loomed taller, their moss-draped limbs reaching like grasping hands. Every splash in the water made me start. Every shadow among the trees concealed potential threats. By mid-morning, I recognized landmarks that told me I was approaching the cabin. As it came into view through the trees, I intended to paddle past as quickly and quietly as possible. But something caught my eye that made me pause. Movement on the small porch. A figure sitting in what looked like a rocking chair that hadn't been there the day before. Logic told me to keep going, to put as much distance between myself and this place as possible. But curiosity, the same curiosity that had led me into this swamp in the first place, made me steer my kayak closer, moving silently through the water. As I drew nearer, I could make out the figure more clearly. An elderly woman, rail-thin and dressed in what appeared to be layers of mismatched clothing despite the oppressive heat. Her skin was dark and weathered like old leather, her white hair tied back in a wild tangle. She rocked slowly back and forth, staring directly at me, though I hadn't made a sound. "I've been expecting you," she called out as I drifted closer. Her voice carried clearly across the water, strong despite her apparent age. "You got something that belongs to me." I hesitated, then guided my kayak to the muddy bank near the cabin. Some part of me screamed that this was madness, that I should flee. But another part, the part that had been raised on my grandmother's stories of spirits and old magic, knew that running wouldn't save me. Whatever had found me in the night would find me again. "What do you mean?" I asked, staying in my kayak, ready to push off at the first sign of danger. The old woman's rocking never faltered. "The book, my grandpère's journal. You took it yesterday." I swallowed hard. Do you live here?" She cackled, the sound echoing unnaturally through the trees. "Live here?" "Nah, not exactly. But this place had been in my family since before your great-grandparents were born. I come here when needs must." She fixed me with a penetrating stare. And needs must now, with what's stirring in the swamp. Against my better judgment, I pulled my kayak onto the bank and stepped out, the mud sucking at my boots. "What's stirring in the swamp?" "You seen them already," she said, her rocking stopping abruptly. "They come to your tent last night. Would have taken you too if I hadn't sent word you were under my protection." She extended a bony hand. "Now, de journal, s'il vous plaît." Reluctantly, I retrieved the leather-bound book from my dry bag and approached the porch. As I handed it to her, our fingers brushed, and I was struck by how cold her skin was, like touching a corpse. "Thank you, Daniel Mercer," she said, running her fingers lovingly over the cover. I stepped back, alarmed. "How do you know my name?" "The swamp whispers, and I listen." She opened the journal, thumbing through the pages with familiarity. "My grandpère wrote of ones like you, folks with the sight who can see what others can't. That's why they marked you. That's why they want you." "Who are they?" I asked, dreading the answer. "They had names once, were people once." She looked up from the book, her eyes suddenly seeming too large for her face. The irises expanded until almost no white showed. "Now, there's something else, something the swamp made." She must have seen the disbelief on my face because she nodded toward the cabin door. "Go on, look inside again. Really look this time." I approached the doorway cautiously, peering into the gloom. In the daylight, the cabin seemed less sinister, just an abandoned shelter reclaimed by time and elements. The crude figures still hung on the walls, but they seemed pathetic now rather than threatening. The work of some isolated person with too much time and too little human contact. I was about to turn away when movement caught my eye. A slight swaying of one of the dolls, though there was no breeze inside the cabin. As I watched, another doll began to move, then another, until all of them were gently swinging on their nails. The temperature inside the cabin plummeted, my breath suddenly visible in the air. The symbols carved into the wall began to glow with a faint, sickly phosphorescence. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing toward the door. "Not hell," the old woman said from behind me, making me jump. She'd moved from her chair without a sound. "Just the other side of the veil." She gestured at the dolls. "Each one a soul caught between. Each one someone the swamp took." That's not possible," I stammered, but the evidence was before my eyes. The dolls were moving more vigorously now, twisting on their nails as if trying to free themselves. "You brought something with you when you came back," the woman said, her voice suddenly grave. "Something followed you from your camp." I spun around, looking back through the door toward the swamp beyond. At first I saw nothing unusual, just the same vista of cypress trees and murky water. Then I noticed them, figures standing motionless among the trees, partially hidden by the Spanish moss. 3 of them, too distant to make out clearly but unmistakably watching the cabin. "Oh, God," I breathed. "God don't come to Honey Island much," the old woman said grimly. "We're on our own here." She pulled something from the pocket of her dress, a small cloth bag that clinked as if it contained stones or shells. "Take this. Keep it close. It won't save you, but it'll slow them down." I accepted the bag automatically, too shocked to refuse. "Slow them down? I need to get out of here. Back to my car. Back to civilization." "You think distance matters to them?" She shook her head. "They've tasted your fear now. Marked you. They'll follow you wherever you go." She thumped the journal with one gnarled finger. "Unless we finish what my grandpère started. Unless we closed a door he opened." "What door? What are you talking about?" My voice had risen to nearly a shout. The woman grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, her fingers like iron bands. "Keep your voice down," she hissed. "They hear you. They always hear you." She released me and returned to the journal, flipping pages until she found what she sought. Here's what happened." She handed me the journal, open to a page dated August 17, 1924. The handwriting was more frantic than in earlier entries, the ink blotched in places as if the writer's hand had been shaking. "I can't read French," I said. "It says they found something when they were digging drainage canals," she translated. "Something old, buried deep into mud. A box made of stone, carved with symbols no one recognized. Foolish men, they opened it." She took the book back, closing it with finality. "Whatever came out has been here ever since, taken people, changing them. My grand-père tried to contain it with his rituals, and for many years it worked, but lately the barriers weaken." I glanced nervously through the door again. The figures among the trees seemed closer now, though I hadn't seen them move. What do they want? To spread, to take more, to remake everything into Swamp's image. She fixed me with those 2 large eyes. "And you, with your sight, would be a valuable addition to their ranks. How do you know all this? Who are you?" "My name is Marie Laveau," she said. I stared at her in disbelief. "Marie Laveau? The Marie Laveau? The voodoo queen of New Orleans? That's impossible. She died in the 1800s. The woman's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "Did she now? History books say lots of things. Some true, some not." She shrugged. "Names have power. Daniel Mercer. I give you mine as a gesture of trust. What matters is that I'm the last one who remembers the old ways, the only one who can help you now." Whether she was delusional or something else entirely, I was beyond caring. The figures outside were definitely closer, and I could make out details now. Their unnatural height, the wrongness of their proportions. Their skin glistened wetly in the dim light, and where their faces should have been were only smooth, blank expanses of flesh with vertical slits that might have been mouths. "What do I do?" I asked, real fear making my voice crack. "We need to renew the barriers," Marie said. "Strengthen them. For that, we need 3 things: blood freely given, water from the deepest part of the basin, and—" She hesitated. "Something only you can provide." "What's that?" "Your fear. Pure, distilled terror." She nodded toward the approaching figures. "They gonna help with that part." Before I could respond, she moved to the small cast-iron stove in the corner and opened its rusted door. Inside was not ashes, as I would have expected, but a small hollow containing a clay bowl filled with dark liquid. "Your blood," she said, producing a wicked-looking knife from somewhere within her clothes. "Just a little. Freely given." I hesitated only a moment. Whatever was outside was getting closer, and despite the impossibility of everything the woman claimed, I knew instinctively that the creatures approaching the cabin meant me harm. I extended my arm. Marie's movements were swift and practiced. The blade stung as it crossed my palm, and blood welled immediately. She held my hand over the bowl, allowing several drops to fall into the dark liquid, which hissed and bubbled upon contact. "Now, the water," she said, reaching into another pocket and producing a small vial of cloudy liquid. "Collected at the new moon from the bottommost depths." She unstoppered it and added it to the mixture, which turned a deep, iridescent blue. "And finally," she said, fixing me with those unsettling eyes, "your fear." "How do I began, but she cut me off with a gesture. "Not yet. It must be genuine, must be primal." She recorked the vial and slipped it back into her pocket. "For now, we prepare." From a shelf I hadn't noticed before, she retrieved a bundle of herbs tied with twine. "Cypress bark, sage, and swamp lily," she explained, lighting the bundle with a match. Fragrant smoke filled the cabin as she moved to each wall in turn, tracing the carved symbols with the smoking herbs. "Protection," she murmured. "Boundaries, barriers." As she worked, I kept watch through the door. The creatures had stopped advancing but continued to watch the cabin with an unnerving stillness. There were more of them now, 5 or 6 at least. "What are they waiting for?" I whispered. "Nightfall," Marie answered without turning. "Their power is stronger in the dark." I checked my watch. 4:17 p.m., maybe 2 hours until sunset. "What happens then?" "Den," Marie said, finishing her circuit of the cabin. "We face dem. We complete the ritual." She placed the smoldering herbs in a shell on top of the stove, then turned to me. "But first, you need to understand what you're facing. Need to know their story." She gestured for me to sit on the floor, then lowered herself with surprising grace for someone of her apparent age. The smoke from the herbs swirled around us, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Long ago, before the Europeans came, this land was sacred to the native peoples, the Chitimacha, the Huma, the Choctaw, she began. They knew there were places where the veil between worlds was thin, where things could cross over. This swamp was such a place. They respected it, feared it, left offerings to appease what lived here. She drew patterns in the dust on the floor as she spoke, intricate designs that reminded me of the symbols on the walls. Then the newcomers arrived. They didn't understand, didn't respect. They drained, they built, they polluted. And in 1924, when they dug the canals, they found what should have stayed buried. "The stone box," I said. Marie nodded. "An ancient prison, created to hold something old and hungry, something that had been trapped long before humans walked these lands." Her finger traced a final line in the dust, completing a symbol that made my eyes hurt to look at directly. "When they opened it, they had no defense against what emerged. It took them first, wearing their bodies like ill-fitting suits. Then it spread, taking more, growing stronger with each soul consumed." "But your grandfather," I said, "he found a way to contain it?" "Partially," she corrected. "He couldn't defeat it. It was too powerful already. But he could bind it to this place, prevent it from spreading beyond the swamp. For that, he paid with his life." She brushed away the symbol she'd drawn, her expression momentarily vulnerable. "And each generation since, someone from our family has maintained dose bindings, renewed them when they weakened. And now it's you," I said. "And now it's me," she agreed. "But I grow old, Daniel Mercer. The rituals demand strength I no longer possess. That's why the barriers fail. That's why they grow bold again." A terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. Why did you really ask me to come in here? Why am I really here? Marie's eyes met mine, unblinking. "Because you have the sight. Because you can see what others can't. Because you can take up the burden when I'm gone." I stood up so quickly I nearly toppled over. "No, absolutely not. I'm a wildlife photographer from New Orleans. I'm not whatever you are. I don't know magic or rituals or how to fight swamp monsters." "You think I was born knowing these things? Marie asked calmly. I was younger than you when the burden fell to me. I learned. You will too. I don't want to learn. I want to leave this place and never come back. And what of the next person they take? And the one after that? What happens when they grow strong enough to break the last of the bindings, to spread beyond the swamp into the towns and cities? I had no answer for that. Outside, the light was beginning to fade as storm clouds gathered once again. The creatures remained at their distance, patient, waiting. You said I need to provide my fear, I said after a long silence. What does that mean? Marie stood, muscles creaking. It means you must face Deem. Stand before them and feel the full weight of their hunger, their alienness. Let them approach until your body screams to run, until every instinct tells you you're about to die. She produced a small glass vial from her pocket. Then, at the moment when terror is purest, you must capture your breath in Dis. She handed me the vial. It was warm to the touch, despite the coolness of the cabin. How will I know when it's the right moment? I asked. You'll know, she said simply, and when you have it, bring it back here. We'll complete the ritual and strengthen the barriers for another generation. Another thought occurred to me. You said they're waiting for nightfall. What's to stop them from taking me the moment I step outside? Like they tried to last night? The herbs I've burned mark you as mine for now, she said. They won't touch you until the protection fades. And how long is that? Long enough. She reached up and removed something from around her neck, a leather cord from which hung a small alligator tooth, yellowed with age. Take this too. When the moment comes, when you've captured your fear, break this. It will lead you back here, no matter how lost you become. I took the necklace and slipped it over my head, still not entirely convinced I wasn't hallucinating this entire experience. Perhaps I'd hit my head during the storm, or eaten something toxic, or... Your doubts don't matter, Marie said, as if reading my mind. The swamp believes. That's enough. She led me to the door. Outside, the light had dimmed further, the approaching storm bringing premature twilight. The creatures still waited among the trees, their blank faces now turned toward us. Remember, Marie said as I stepped onto the porch. Let them get close. Let the fear build. Capture the moment of purest terror, then break the tooth and run. I nodded, unable to speak. My body felt disconnected, moving on autopilot as I descended the porch steps. The air outside was heavy with the promise of rain, charged with electricity from the approaching storm. I could smell vegetation, mud, and beneath it all, something else, a sweet, rotting odor that made my stomach churn. The creatures didn't move as I approached the edge of the clearing. Up close, they were even more wrong. Too tall, too thin, joints that bent in impossible ways. Their skin glistened with a mucus coating that caught what little light remained. And though they had no eyes that I could see, I knew they watched me. I stopped about 20 feet from the nearest one, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. The vial felt slippery in my sweating palm. How close was close enough? How much fear was sufficient? As if in response to my unspoken question, the creatures began to move. Not toward me, but around me, forming a loose circle. Their movements were fluid but unnatural, like underwater plants swaying in a current. The circle tightened gradually, 5 of them closing in with the same inexorable patience they'd shown at my tent the night before. My mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but Marie's words held me in place. Let them get close. Let the fear build. The nearest creature was 10 feet away now, then 8, then 5. I could hear sounds coming from the vertical slits in their faces. Wet, clicking noises that might have been attempts at speech. The smell of rot grew stronger, making my eyes water. 3 feet away, the lead creature stopped. So close I could see the individual scales on its skin, the way they overlapped like a reptile's. So close I could see that what I'd taken for a vertical slit was actually a mouth that now began to open, widening impossibly until the creature's head seemed to split in half. Inside was not a throat, but a writhing mass of finger-like appendages, each tipped with what looked like a human tooth. Terror gripped me so completely that I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My vision narrowed to that impossible mouth, those reaching appendages. This was it, the moment Marie had described. With hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, I uncorked the vial and held it to my lips, exhaling a single, trembling breath into it. The glass turned instantly cold, frosting over as if I'd breathed winter into it. I corked it quickly and clutched the alligator tooth hanging from my neck. The creature before me lunged forward, those finger appendages stretching toward my face. With a desperate cry, I snapped the tooth between my fingers. The world shifted. There's no other way to describe it. Colors inverted for a split second, sound disappeared, and I felt as if I were falling despite my feet remaining firmly on the ground. When reality reasserted itself, I was facing in a different direction, and the cabin was directly ahead of me, much closer than it should have been. I ran, the vial clutched tightly in my fist. Behind me, I heard those wet, clicking sounds turn to something like howls, rage or hunger or both. The creatures pursued, their movements unnaturally fast, covering ground in long, loping strides. I reached the porch just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Marie stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Inside," she commanded. "Quickly." I stumbled up the steps and past her into the cabin. She followed, slamming the door shut and bracing it with a length of wood that hadn't been there before. Outside, the creatures converged on the cabin, their forms visible through the dirty window as they circled just as they had circled my tent the night before. "Did you get it?" Marie asked, her eyes locked on my clenched fist. I nodded, uncurling my fingers to reveal the frosted vial. "What now?" "Now we complete the ritual." She took the vial from me and moved to the stove, where the bowl of mixed blood and water still sat. The dolls on the walls had ceased their movement but seemed to watch us with invisible eyes. Outside, the storm broke in earnest. Rain hammered against the roof and walls, the sound almost drowning out the inhuman cries of the creatures as they tested the cabin's boundaries. Lightning flashed, illuminating their ghastly forms through the window. Marie added the contents of my vial to the mixture in the bowl, which turned a deep, arterial red. She began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. Not French or English or any European tongue, but something older, the syllables harsh and guttural. As she chanted, the symbols carved into the walls began to glow again, brighter this time, pulsing in rhythm with her words. The temperature in the cabin plummeted until I could see our breath hanging in the air. The creatures outside grew more frenzied, hurling themselves against the walls and door. The entire structure shook with their impacts. The window cracked, then shattered, glass exploding inward. Rain and wind whipped into the cabin, carrying that sweet rot smell. Marie never faltered, her chanting growing louder, more insistent. She dipped her fingers into the red mixture and began to trace symbols on her own face, then reached for me. I stood frozen as she marked my forehead, my cheeks, my throat with the cold liquid. A long gray arm snaked through the broken window, fingers ending in knife-like claws reaching for Marie. Without breaking her chant, she seized an herb bundle from the shelf and thrust it at the appendage. The creature howled as the herbs made contact, the arm withdrawing in what seemed like pain. But more arms followed, pushing through gaps in the walls, reaching around the door. Marie's chanting reached a crescendo, her voice cracking with the strain. She seized the bowl and flung its contents toward the ceiling. The liquid didn't fall. Instead, it hung suspended in the air, droplets forming an intricate, three-dimensional pattern that matched the symbols on the walls. Each droplet began to glow with an inner light, brighter and brighter until I had to shield my eyes. Marie seized my arm. "Don't look away," she commanded. "Witness." I forced my eyes open as the light reached an unbearable intensity. The cabin walls seemed to dissolve, revealing not the swamp outside but a vast, star-filled void. The creatures clinging to the structure froze, their blank faces turned toward the cosmic expanse. From within that void, something answered, a presence so vast and ancient that my mind could barely comprehend it. The light collapsed inward, concentrating into a single point of radiance that hovered between Marie and me. She reached for it, cupping it in her palms like a firefly. Her face, illuminated from below, showed lines of exhaustion, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. "It is done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The barrières are renewed." Outside, the creatures retreated, melting back into the swamp like mist before the morning sun. The rain continued to fall, but the unnatural frenzy of the storm began to abate. The symbols on the walls faded back to ordinary carvings, the dolls to simple, crude objects. Marie carried the light to the stove and placed it gently inside, closing the iron door. "It will stay here," she said. "Bind them for another generation." I sank to the floor, exhaustion and reaction overwhelming me. What were those things? "I told you, people once, changed by what escaped a box." She sat beside me, suddenly looking every one of her many years. Trapped between worlds now, hungry for what they can no longer have. "And this will keep them contained? Stop them from taking more people?" "For a time." She fixed me with those two large eyes. "But you see now why someone must maintain the rituals, why someone must remember." I understood then what she wanted from me, what she'd been preparing me for since I entered the cabin. "I can't stay here," I said. "I have a life, a career, people who would miss me." "I'm not asking you to stay," she said. "Only to learn, to return when necessary, to take up the burden when I no longer can. And if I refuse, then when I die, the barriers weaken for the last time." She gestured toward the swamp beyond the broken window. "And they spread, taking and changing until nothing remains of the world you know." We sat in silence as the storm gradually subsided. Dawn was approaching, the eastern sky lightening to a pearly gray. I thought of my sister Emma, waiting for a check-in message that would never come. I thought of my apartment in New Orleans, my photography assignments, the ordinary life I'd taken for granted. And I thought of what I'd seen, the creatures, the ritual, the vast presence from beyond that had answered Marie's call. Things that defied rational explanation but were undeniably real. "Teach me," I said finally, "but I need to let my sister know I'm okay first." Marie nodded. "The nearest town is 10 miles south. I can show you the way through the swamp. There's a store there with a phone." She rose stiffly to her feet. "And then you'll return?" I hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes, I'll return." She smiled for the first time, revealing teeth that were surprisingly white and even. "I knew you would. The swamp chose well when it called you here." We left the cabin as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the water to liquid gold. The swamp was peaceful again, showing no sign of the horrors of the night before. Birds called from the trees, and insects hummed in the warm, moist air. But now I knew what lurked beneath the surface, what waited in the shadows between the cypress trees. The knowledge was a weight I would carry forever, along with the responsibility Marie had placed on my shoulders. As we made our way through the winding channels of Honey Island Swamp, I glanced back once at the cabin, now receding into the distance. For just a moment, I thought I saw figures watching from among the trees. Not the creatures from the night before, but people. Ordinary people with sad, hollow eyes, waiting, watching, reminding me of the cost of failure. I turned away and paddled harder, following Marie deeper into the swamp that would now be part of me forever. It's been 10 months since that July. I still live in New Orleans, still work as a wildlife photographer. To anyone looking at my life from the outside, nothing has changed. But every month, when the moon wanes to darkness, I return to Honey Island. Marie is teaching me the old ways, the rituals, the boundaries between worlds. Sometimes, on those nights, I catch glimpses of the creatures moving among the trees. They watch me with their eyeless faces, keeping their distance now but always hungry, always waiting for the barriers to weaken. And sometimes, in my dreams, I hear the voice that spoke from the void, ancient and vast and utterly alien. It whispers of patience, of time beyond human reckoning, of hunger that can never be sated. I wake from those dreams gasping for air, reaching instinctively for the alligator tooth I now wear always around my neck, a replacement for the one I broke, given to me by Marie on my second visit to the cabin. Emma worries about my monthly trips to the swamp, but I tell her it's for a long-term photography project. She doesn't need to know the truth. No one does, except for those who carry the burden as I now do. The swamp keeps its secrets, and now so do I. My name is Marcus Holloway, and I am 32 years old. This happened in October 2024. The first time I heard the call, I mistook it for a wounded animal. That's what any sane person would have done. The sound was distant, a hoarse, plaintive wail that rose from somewhere deep in the Kisatchie National Forest, bouncing off the dense pine canopy before reaching my ears. I'd been hiking the Longleaf Vista Trail for nearly 3 hours by then, and the afternoon light had taken on that peculiar golden hue that only appears in autumn, making the world seem both more beautiful and more fragile all at once. I stopped, my breath visible in the cooling air, and listened. Nothing. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the occasional scolding of a squirrel. I shrugged off my heavy backpack, feeling the relief in my shoulders, and took a long pull from my water bottle. 5 days into my solo hiking trip, and I was already beginning to feel like I could stay out here forever. No emails, no deadlines, no reminders of the life I'd left behind in New Orleans. A failed marriage, a stalled career, and the lingering grief that had followed me like a shadow since my brother's disappearance 3 years ago. The forest held no judgments. It simply existed, indifferent to human suffering. I found comfort in that indifference. I checked the time, 4:17 p.m. I needed to make camp before darkness fell. According to my map, there was a small clearing about 2 miles ahead where overnight camping was permitted. I shouldered my pack again and continued along the trail, carefully marking my position on my GPS app. The signal was spotty out here, but it had been reliable enough so far. The wail came again as I rounded a bend in the trail. Louder this time. Less like an animal and more like... I froze, my skin prickling with sudden unease. It sounded like a child. A child crying out in pain or terror. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding thin and insignificant among the towering pines. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" Only the wind answered, rustling the underbrush. I stood paralyzed with indecision. The rational part of my brain said to stick to the trail. Wandering off-path in an unfamiliar forest was exactly how people ended up as cautionary tales on the news. But if there was actually someone out there, especially a child, how could I live with myself if I just walked away? I made what I thought was a reasonable compromise. I would follow the sound, but only for 15 minutes. If I found nothing, I'd turn back and continue to the campsite. I marked my current location on the GPS, noting the coordinates carefully in case I needed to find my way back. "I'm coming to help," I shouted, hoping my voice carried. "Keep making noise so I can find you." As if in response, the cry came again, fainter now, as if moving away. I plunged into the underbrush, pushing aside brambles and low-hanging branches. The forest floor was soft beneath my boots, decades of fallen pine needles creating a springy carpet. I moved as quickly as I dared, calling out periodically. Each time, the crying seemed to respond, but it never got closer, always just beyond the next thicket or ridge. The 15 minutes stretched to 20, then 30. The golden afternoon light was fading now, the shadows between the trees deepening. I checked my GPS and felt a jolt of alarm. The screen showed only a spinning wheel, searching for signal. I looked back the way I'd come, but nothing looked familiar. The forest had a way of swallowing your path behind you. Shit, I muttered, fishing out my compass. At least I could head east, which would eventually lead me back to the main trail. I was about to turn back when I heard it again. The cry. But this time, it wasn't distant. It seemed to emanate from just beyond a dense stand of pines, perhaps 50 yards ahead. Heart pounding, I pushed forward. The underbrush thinned as I approached what appeared to be a small clearing. The fading light filtered through the canopy in weak, slanting rays, and there, in the center of the clearing, stood a crude wooden structure. It wasn't much, just a small, dilapidated cabin with a sagging roof and weathered gray boards. No lights shone from within. No smoke curled from the crumbling stone chimney. It looked abandoned, possibly for decades. "Hello?" I called again, approaching cautiously. "Is anyone here? I heard someone crying." Silence greeted me. The forest around the cabin seemed unnaturally quiet, I realized. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the soft sighing of the wind through the pines. Common sense told me to leave, to use the remaining daylight to find my way back to the trail. But curiosity, or something deeper, pulled me toward the cabin. I thought of my brother, Michael, who had vanished while hiking in this very forest. The authorities had conducted a thorough search but found nothing. No body, no equipment, nothing to indicate what had happened to him. He'd simply walked into the Kisatchie and disappeared. I approached the cabin's warped wooden door. Up close, I could see that while the structure was old, it wasn't completely abandoned. Someone had nailed fresh boards across one broken window. A rusted but relatively new padlock hung from the door hasp. "Hello?" I called once more, knocking firmly on the door. "Is anyone in there? Do you need help?" The knock echoed hollowly. I pressed my ear against the rough wood but heard nothing from within. I tried the door handle, locked as expected. I walked around the perimeter of the cabin, peering through the grimy windows. The interior was dark, but I could make out the shadowy outlines of simple furniture. A table, what looked like a wood stove, some shelves. The sun was setting rapidly now, the forest darkening around me. I needed to make a decision. Try to find my way back to the trail in the gathering darkness or make camp here by the cabin and continue in the morning. Safety won out over my growing unease. I'd camp here tonight and search for the trail at first light. I cleared a small area near the cabin, careful to keep a respectful distance in case the owner returned. The night was growing cold, so I set up my tent quickly and got a small fire going. As I sat beside the flames eating a dinner of trail mix and beef jerky, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from the darkened windows of the cabin. "Just nerves," I muttered to myself, chewing mechanically. "You're overtired." But as night fully descended, bringing with it a canopy of brilliant stars visible through gaps in the forest ceiling, the feeling only intensified. Twice I thought I heard soft movements inside the cabin, the creak of floorboards, the subtle shifting of weight. Each time I called out, offering help or apologies for trespassing. Each time, I was met with silence. I doused my fire around 10 and crawled into my tent, zipping the flap securely behind me. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every rustle and snap in the forest seemed amplified in the darkness. The wail didn't come again, but somehow that was worse, as if whatever had made that sound was now quietly waiting. I must have dozed eventually because I jolted awake to the sound of footsteps crunching on fallen leaves and pine needles. The quality of darkness inside my tent told me it was still the middle of the night. The footsteps circled my tent slowly, deliberately, pausing occasionally before continuing their measured circuit. "Who's there?" I called, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed the beam at the tent wall. The footsteps stopped. I could see no shadow, no silhouette against the nylon. "This is private property," came a voice from the darkness, male, elderly, with a deep Louisiana drawl that stretched each word like taffy. "You're trespassing." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," I said, louder and with more confidence than I felt. "I got lost following what sounded like someone in distress. I was planning to head back to the trail at first light." A long silence followed. I strained to hear any movement outside. "There ain't nobody in distress out here," the voice finally replied. "Just you, if you don't clear out by morning." "Did you hear it too?" I asked, curiosity overwhelming my better judgment. "The crying." Another long pause. "You best not listen to them sounds," the voice said, lower now. "They ain't what they seem." "What do you mean?" I asked, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "What are they?" "The hollow people," the voice whispered, so softly I had to strain to hear it. "They call to the lost, the grieving, the ones looking for something they'll never find." My mouth went dry. "I don't understand." "Your kind never does," the voice replied. "Not till it's too late." The footsteps retreated, and I heard the cabin door creak open and then close with a decisive thud. I sat frozen in my tent, mind racing. The hollow people? What the hell did that mean? And how did this stranger know I was grieving, searching for something? I barely slept the rest of the night, drifting in and out of uneasy consciousness. My dreams were troubled. Michael walking ahead of me on a forest path, always just out of reach no matter how fast I ran. His voice calling back to me, gradually changing until it no longer sounded human. Dawn came as a mercy. I packed up quickly in the gray morning light, eager to be away from the cabin and its unsettling occupant. As I shouldered my backpack, the cabin door opened. I tensed, preparing for a confrontation. The man who emerged was not what I expected. He was ancient, his dark skin weathered into deep lines like the bark of an old tree. Wisps of white hair framed a face dominated by eyes so pale they were almost colorless. He leaned heavily on a gnarled walking stick carved from some dark wood I didn't recognize. "You're still here," he observed, no menace in his tone now, only resignation. "I'm leaving," I assured him, gesturing to my packed gear. "Can you point me toward the Longleaf Vista Trail?" He studied me, those pale eyes seeming to look through rather than at me. "You heard them calling," he said. Not a question. I nodded reluctantly. "They know you now," he continued. "Marked you. They'll keep calling." "Who are they?" I demanded, frustration overcoming fear. "What are you talking about?" He sighed heavily and lowered himself onto a rough-hewn bench beside the cabin door. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a stump across from him. "You got time for an old man's story before you go running to your death?" Something in his manner made me obey. I perched awkwardly on the stump, keeping my backpack on, ready to flee if necessary. "Name's Elijah Comeau," he said. "Been living out here 47 years now. Used to be a ranger with the Forest Service till I saw things that changed me." He tapped his pale eyes. "Changed these, too. Used to be brown as chestnuts." I shifted uncomfortably. "What things?" "The hollow people," he said simply. "Spirits, some folks might call them. Not ghosts exactly. Older than that. They've been in these woods since before the French, before the natives even. They're hungry." "Hungry for what?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "For the living," Elijah replied. "For grief, pain, loss. They feed on it, use it to lure folks deeper into their territory. They mimic what you're missing most. A lost child's cry, a lover's whisper, a brother's voice." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I never told you about my brother." Elijah's expression softened slightly. "Didn't have to. I can see it on you. The hollow look of somebody searching. They see it too." "My brother disappeared in this forest 3 years ago," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Michael Holloway. The authorities searched for weeks but never found a trace." Elijah nodded slowly. "There've been others, many others. The official folks, they blame it on exposure, accidents, wild animals, easier that way. And you think these, hollow people took my brother?" "I know they did," he said with quiet certainty, "just like they're trying to take you now." I stood abruptly. "This is insane. I need to get back to the trail." Elijah made no move to stop me. "Longleaf Vista's that way," he said, pointing east. "About 2 miles. Stay straight, don't follow no sounds, and you might make it." "Thanks," I said stiffly, already backing away. "Or," he added, his pale eyes gleaming, "I could show you where they take them, the ones they call to." I froze. "You know where my brother might be?" "Not your brother anymore," Elijah warned. "But what's left of him?" "Yeah, I know." Every rational part of me screamed to walk away, to head east toward the trail and civilization and sanity. But I'd spent 3 years wondering, imagining every possible fate that might have befallen Michael. Even a terrible truth seemed better than eternal uncertainty. "Show me," I said. Elijah nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. He disappeared into his cabin briefly, emerging with a battered backpack of his own and what looked like an ancient shotgun. "Won't kill them," he said, noticing my alarmed gaze on the weapon. "But it slows them down, makes them think twice." We set off deeper into the forest, away from the direction Elijah had indicated would lead to safety. He moved with surprising agility for his age, picking his way confidently through underbrush and overfallen logs. I followed close behind, increasingly aware that I was putting my life in the hands of a possible madman. "How far?" I asked after we'd been walking for perhaps an hour. "Not far in distance," Elijah replied cryptically. "Far in other ways." The forest was changing subtly around us. The pines grew closer together, their branches interlacing to block more of the sky. The undergrowth thinned, giving way to a carpet of pale fungi that seemed to pulse gently when viewed from the corner of the eye. The air felt heavier, harder to draw into my lungs. "We're entering their territory now," Elijah murmured. "Stay close. Don't listen to nothing but my voice." As if on cue, I heard it again, that distant, plaintive cry. But this time, it wasn't the wail of a child. It was a man's voice, achingly familiar. "Marcus!" it called. "Marcus, help me!" Michael's voice. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Did you hear that?" I whispered hoarsely. Elijah gripped my arm with alarming strength. "It ain't him," he hissed. "Remember what I told you. They mimic. They use your grief against you." "Marcus, please," Michael's voice called again, closer now. "I've been trapped so long. Follow my voice." I wrenched my arm from Elijah's grasp. "That's my brother," I insisted, though a part of me recognized the truth in the old man's warning. "It wears your brother's voice like a mask," Elijah said, his pale eyes boring into mine. "You follow that voice, you'll never come back. Is that what you want? To disappear like he did?" The pleading calls continued, becoming more desperate. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block them out. "I just want to know what happened to him," I whispered. "Then keep following me," Elijah said firmly, "and stop listening to that thing." We continued deeper into the strange forest. The fungi carpet grew thicker, the pale growths now climbing tree trunks and hanging in grotesque clusters from low branches. The air took on a sickly, sweet smell, like overripe fruit on the edge of rot. And all around us, voices called, sometimes Michael's, sometimes others, unfamiliar, yet somehow enticing. Finally, we reached what appeared to be a sinkhole, a vast, roughly circular depression in the forest floor. The edges sloped gently at first, then dropped away sharply into darkness. The trees around its rim were twisted, bent inward as if straining to see into the depths. The fungi clustered most densely here, glowing with a faint phosphorescence in the shadows. "This is the place," Elijah said quietly. "The hollow lands, where they bring them." I approached the edge cautiously. "Bring who?" "The taken ones," the answered calls. Elijah stayed a few paces back. "They hollow them out down there, use up all their grief and pain and longing until there's nothing left but a shell. Then the shell joins them, calls to others. Family, mostly, the ones still grieving." The voices had stopped, I realized. The forest was utterly silent except for our breathing. "My brother is down there?" I asked, peering into the darkness. "What's left of him might be," Elijah replied, "but it ain't your brother no more." As if in response to his words, a figure appeared at the bottom of the sinkhole. Even from this distance, I recognized Michael's lanky frame, his characteristic way of standing with weight shifted to one leg. He looked up, and even in the dim light I could see his face, unchanged after 3 years, still wearing the half-smile that had always been his default expression. "Marcus," he called, waving. "You came. I knew you would." "Michael," I called back, taking another step toward the edge. Elijah's hand clamped onto my shoulder. "That's how they get you," he warned. "Look closer." I narrowed my eyes, focusing on the figure below. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Then, slowly, I began to notice subtle wrongness. Michael's movements were too fluid, almost boneless. His smile never faltered, never changed in intensity. And his eyes, even at this distance, I could see they reflected the faint glow of the fungi, shining like a cat's in darkness. "What happened to him?" I whispered. "He answered the call," Elijah said simply. "Just like you're doing now. They found his grief, the mother you both lost young, I'm guessing, and used it to bring him here." I nodded numbly. Our mother had died when Michael was 12 and I was 9. Cancer. He'd taken it harder than me, had become obsessed with hiking and wilderness survival afterward. Mom's passions. "What do they want?" I asked, unable to tear my eyes away from the thing wearing my brother's form. "To not be alone," Elijah said. "They've been here so long. Forgotten gods, maybe, or something that never was human to begin with. They're empty inside. Hollow. They fill themselves with our emotions, our connections, our humanity." Below, the Michael thing had begun to climb the sloping side of the sinkhole, moving with that same unsettling fluidity. Its smile remained fixed, its eyes unblinking. "We should go," Elijah urged. "It's seen us now. Others will come." "I can't leave him," I protested, though I knew it wasn't really Michael anymore. "He's already gone," Elijah insisted. "Been gone 3 years. The thing is just wearing his shape, his memories." "Marcus," the thing called, its voice perfectly mimicking my brother's warm tenor. "I've missed you so much. Don't leave me alone again." Elijah raised his shotgun. "Get back," he shouted at the creature. "He ain't yours to take." The thing wearing Michael's face paused, cocking its head at an impossible angle. The smile widened, stretching beyond the limits of a human face. "But he wants to be with me," it said, its voice distorting, multiple tones overlapping like a chorus. "Don't you, Marcus? Don't you want to know what happened? Don't you want to be together again?" And God help me, part of me did. 3 years of not knowing, of imagining every possible horror had hollowed me out in my own way. I took another step toward the edge. "Marcus," Elijah barked, "remember what I told you. They feed on grief, on longing. That's how they trap you." The Michael thing was closer now, perhaps 20 feet down the slope. Other figures had appeared at the bottom of the sinkhole, shadowy forms gradually taking shape, climbing upward with the same fluid grace. "They're coming," Elijah muttered. "Too many for us." He fired the shotgun. The report was deafening in the silent forest. The shot struck the Michael thing in the chest and it stumbled backwards slightly. No blood appeared. Instead, the thing's form seemed to waver, like heat distortion above hot asphalt. For just a moment I saw what lay beneath the familiar features, something gray and mottled, with too many joints and not enough face. Then it reformed, Michael's visage settling back into place. But the illusion was broken for me now. I could see the wrongness clearly, the slightly too long fingers, the way its feet didn't quite touch the ground, the emptiness behind its eyes. "That's not my brother," I said more to myself than to Elijah. "No," he agreed grimly. "Now run." We turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush. Behind us I heard a chorus of voices, some calling my name, others making sounds no human throat could produce. The trees seemed to close in around us, branches reaching like clutching hands. The fungi carpet pulsed violently underfoot, releasing clouds of spores that glowed briefly in the air before dissipating. I lost track of time as we ran. My lungs burned, and my legs trembled with exertion. Only fear kept me moving. Fear and the certainty that stopping meant joining Michael in whatever twilight existence the hollow people had consigned him to. Elijah led our flight, occasionally firing behind us when the sounds of pursuit grew too close. Each shot bought us seconds, nothing more. The old man's stamina was remarkable, but I could see him flagging as we raced through the increasingly alien landscape. "How do we get out?" I gasped during a brief pause to catch our breath. "Cross running water," Elijah panted. "There's a stream ahead. If we can reach it." A howl rose behind us, a sound of frustration and hunger that made my skin crawl. Closer than before, much closer. "Go," Elijah shouted, shoving me forward. "I'll hold them." "I'm not leaving you," I protested. "You got a life to get back to," he argued. "I've been living on borrowed time for decades. Now go. Stream's just ahead. Follow it east. It'll take you to the main trail." Before I could argue further, he turned and raised his shotgun. Through the trees, I could see them coming, a dozen or more figures, some wearing human shapes, others only partially formed, all moving with that same unsettling fluidity. Leading them was the thing wearing Michael's face. "Go!" Elijah roared, firing into their midst. I ran. God forgive me, I ran. The sound of another shot followed me, then a scream that might have been Elijah, might have been something else entirely. I didn't look back. The forest blurred around me. Branches whipped my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my heart felt ready to burst from my chest. But somehow, I kept running. I heard it then, the gentle burble of flowing water, the stream, salvation. With a final, desperate surge of energy, I broke through a thicket of brambles and stumbled down a short embankment. Cold water soaked my boots as I splashed into the stream, no more than knee-deep but running swift and clear over a rocky bed. I turned to look behind me, expecting to see the hollow people emerging from the trees. Instead, they stood at the forest's edge, a crowd of mismatched figures with Michael's at the forefront. They made no move to cross the water. "You can't leave," Michael's voice called, though his mouth didn't move in sync with the words. "Don't you want to know what happened to me? Don't you want the truth?" "You're not the truth," I called back, my voice breaking. "You're not my brother." The thing wearing Michael's face tilted its head, the movement jerky and wrong. "But I remember everything," it said. "I remember how you promised Mom you'd always look after me. How you failed!" The words struck like physical blows. It was true. I had made that promise. And I had failed, letting Michael drift away after college, too consumed with my own life to notice his growing isolation, his increasingly risky solo expeditions. "You can make it right," the thing continued, its voice softening. "Stay with me. Protect me now." For a moment, just a moment, I wavered. Then I thought of Elijah, who had given his life so I could escape. I thought of the real Michael, not this hollow mockery wearing his face. "My brother is gone," I said firmly, "and I'm leaving." The Michael thing's face contorted with rage, the human mask slipping to reveal something ancient and hungry beneath. It screamed, a sound no human could make, and the others joined in. a cacophony of thwarted hunger. I turned my back on them and began wading downstream, moving as quickly as the slippery rocks would allow. Their cries followed me, growing fainter with distance but never completely fading. Even when I could no longer hear them, I felt their pull, a hollow ache in my chest urging me to turn back. I don't know how long I followed the stream. Hours, maybe. The forest gradually returned to normal around me. Ordinary pines and oaks, natural underbrush, the occasional startled deer or squirrel. Eventually, I spotted a wooden footbridge ahead, part of the main trail. Civilization, safety, sanity. I climbed up to the trail and collapsed on a bench, physically and emotionally spent. My GPS signal returned, showing I was about 4 miles from the trailhead. I could make it by nightfall if I pushed. As I gathered my strength to continue, I thought of Elijah. I should report his death, I knew. But who would believe my story? What would I tell the authorities? That an old man with pale eyes had saved me from ancient entities that lived in a sinkhole and fed on grief. They'd think I was insane or, worse, somehow responsible for whatever had happened to him. In the end, I said nothing. I hiked out, drove back to New Orleans, and tried to forget. But forgetting proved impossible. The voices still called to me in dreams. Michael's voice, but now Elijah's too, promising answers, promising closure, promising an end to grief. I've learned to live with it, mostly. I've even started hiking again, though never alone and never in the Kisatchie. Sometimes I think about going back, about finding that cabin and the sinkhole beyond, about facing the hollow people again. Not to join them, but to somehow free Michael and Elijah, if such a thing is possible. But then I remember Elijah's warning. They feed on grief, on longing. That's how they trap you. So instead, I try to fill the hollow places inside myself with other things. Friends, work, small joys where I can find them. And I stay away from the deep woods, especially at dusk, when lost voices call most sweetly from the gathering shadows. I haven't told anyone this story until now. Maybe writing it down will help me finally let go of the guilt I still carry. For Michael, for Elijah. Or maybe it will serve as a warning to others. Be careful what calls you follow into the wilderness. Be careful what voices you answer. Because sometimes the things we've lost are best left unfound. Sometimes the hollow places should remain empty. My name is Thomas Hargrove, and I am 34 years old. This happened in April 2023. I've never been one for the outdoors. Cities made sense to me. Predictable grids, cell service, and the comforting knowledge that help was always minutes away. But when my girlfriend Elise suggested we spend a long weekend hiking in the Tensas River National Wildlife Refuge in northeastern Louisiana, I reluctantly agreed. After 3 years together, I'd learned that Elise's adventurous spirit was infectious, and her passion for wildlife photography had taken us to some remarkable places. "It'll be good for you," she insisted, those hazel eyes sparkling with excitement as she scrolled through images of ancient cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. There's something primal about disconnecting from all this. She gestured vaguely at my apartment, the dual monitors where I spent my days designing websites, the smart speakers, the constantly buzzing phone. I couldn't argue with that. My graphic design business had taken off over the past year, and while the success was welcome, the constant connectivity was wearing me thin. Maybe a few days of silence was exactly what I needed. Plus, she added with a mischievous smile, they say the refuge has some of the last remaining old-growth bottomland hardwood forests in the Mississippi Valley. Think of the shots I could get. How could I say no to that? Photography wasn't just Elise's hobby, it was her calling. At 32, she'd already had her work featured in several nature magazines. This trip might give her the portfolio pieces she needed for the big break she'd been chasing. So, I agreed. We'd spend 4 days hiking through the Tensas River National Wildlife Refuge, camping along the way. Just the two of us, the wilderness, and whatever creatures called those 80,000 acres home. What I didn't know then was that some of those creatures weren't listed in any wildlife guide. The drive from New Orleans took about 4 hours. As we left the interstate and turned onto increasingly narrow roads, the landscape transformed. The manicured lawns and orderly structures of civilization gave way to wild, untamed beauty. The forest grew denser, the road rougher. Massive oak and cypress trees created a natural corridor, their branches forming an archway above us, filtering the late afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns across the windshield. "Almost there," Elise said, checking the map on her phone. "Signal's getting spotty." Sure enough, the bars on my own phone had dwindled to nothing. I felt a twinge of anxiety, the same feeling I get when my laptop battery drops to single digits, but I pushed it aside. This disconnection was the whole point, wasn't it? We arrived at the ranger station just before closing. The building was little more than a wooden cabin with a metal roof, weathered by years of Louisiana humidity. A faded sign displayed trail maps and wildlife warnings. As we stepped out of the car, the April air hit me, thick with moisture and alive with the chirping of unseen insects. Inside, a ranger named Bill greeted us with the slow, easy drawl I'd come to associate with this part of the country. He was in his 50s, with sun-leathered skin and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Y'all picked a good weekend," he said, stamping our permits. "Weather's supposed to hold nice." He spread a map across the counter, his calloused finger tracing our planned route through the refuge. "Now, you'll want to stick to the marked trails here. Some of these backwaters can get mighty confusing, especially for folks not familiar with bayou country." Elise leaned forward eagerly. "We were hoping to reach Tensas Bayou. I've heard the old cypress stands there are incredible." Something flickered across Bill's face. So briefly, I almost missed it. Concern? Hesitation. But it was gone before I could be sure, replaced by his amiable smile. "Tensas Bayou's beautiful, no doubt. Just be mindful of your surroundings. Weather can change quick around water, and—" He paused, seemingly choosing his words carefully. "Folks sometimes get turned around out there. The mist comes in thick off the water, especially this time of year." "We'll be careful," I assured him, though I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. Something in his tone made me uneasy. "One more thing," Bill added as we turned to leave. "If you happen across any old structures out there, cabins, hunting blinds, whatever, best to just leave them be. Some of them belong to the Abelard family. They've been on that land since before it was a refuge. They're particular about trespassers." "Local history," Elise said with an excited smile once we were back at the car. "I love it." I wasn't so sure. There was something in the ranger's warning that felt less like friendly advice and more like a veiled caution. But Elise was already loading her camera gear, her face lit with anticipation, and I didn't want to dampen her enthusiasm with my city-bred paranoia. We drove to the trailhead and geared up in silence, the weight of our packs a reminder of how self-sufficient we'd need to be for the next several days. The sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. "We should find a spot to camp before dark," I suggested, adjusting the straps on my shoulders. Elise nodded, snapping a quick picture of the trail map at the head of the path. "There's a clearing about 2 miles in. Should be perfect." The trail began as a well-defined path, soft with pine needles and damp earth. The late afternoon light filtered through the canopy above, creating an almost ethereal glow. Despite my initial reservations, I found myself relaxing as we walked. The rhythm of our footsteps, the gentle sway of branches overhead, the occasional call of a bird. It all blended into a natural symphony that soothed the constant buzz of thoughts in my mind. Elise stopped frequently to photograph interesting fungi, unusually shaped trees, or the play of light through leaves. I didn't mind. It gave me time to absorb our surroundings, to breathe in air that tasted different from the recycled atmosphere of my apartment. "Look," she whispered at one point, pointing to a massive fallen log beside the trail. A cluster of vibrant orange mushrooms sprouted from the decaying wood, their caps glistening with moisture. Chicken of the woods, edible if you know what you're doing. Let's stick to the dehydrated meals, I suggested, eyeing the fungi skeptically. She laughed, the sound bright against the deepening shadows of the forest. City boy. By the time we reached the clearing, twilight was settling over the refuge. We worked together to set up the tent, a routine we'd perfected over previous weekend trips. As Elise secured the rainfly, I gathered wood for a small fire, taking care to collect only fallen branches as the park regulations required. The clearing was a natural opening in the forest, roughly circular and carpeted with soft grass. It felt almost too perfect, as if it had been designed rather than formed by natural processes. At the far edge, the land began to slope gently downward, suggesting we were near higher ground that would eventually lead to the bayou systems Elise was so eager to photograph. As darkness fell completely, we sat by the fire eating our rehydrated pasta dinner. Above us, stars began to appear in patches between the tree branches, more numerous and brilliant than what we could see through New Orleans light pollution. The night was alive with sound. Frogs calling from unseen water sources, insects chirping, the occasional rustle in the underbrush that I tried not to overthink. "This is what I needed," Elise said softly, leaning against me. The firelight caught the copper highlights in her dark hair, making it shimmer. No emails, no deadlines, no algorithms to chase. Just this. I had to admit she was right. Despite the weight of the pack, the unfamiliar sounds, and the complete absence of cell service, I felt a curious lightness. The constant tension in my shoulders had eased. My mind, usually racing with project timelines and client revisions, had quieted. "You were right," I conceded, kissing the top of her head. "Though ask me again when we haven't showered for 3 days." She laughed and playfully shoved me. "You'll be fine. Besides, I packed wet wipes." After dousing the fire, we retreated to the tent. The air mattress wasn't exactly comfortable, but exhaustion from the day's hike made it feel luxurious enough. Elise fell asleep almost immediately, her breathing deep and regular beside me. I lay awake a bit longer, listening to the night sounds of the refuge, so different from the urban white noise I was accustomed to. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A sound that didn't fit with the natural chorus outside. A distant voice, perhaps? A call or a cry carried on the night air? I strained to hear it again, but there was nothing. Just the wind in the trees and the steady rhythm of Elise's breathing. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just the unfamiliar acoustics of the forest playing tricks on my city-tuned ears. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around me and closed my eyes, determined to get rest for tomorrow's longer hike. But as sleep finally claimed me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out in the darkness had called my name. I awoke to the sound of rain pattering against the tent fly. Gray morning light filtered through the nylon, casting the interior in a gloomy hue. Elise was already up, sitting cross-legged in her sleeping bag, reviewing yesterday's photos on her camera's display screen. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said without looking up. "We might need to adjust our plans." I rubbed sleep from my eyes, noting the time on my watch, just after 7 a.m. "The rain?" She nodded. "It's not too heavy, but the forecast didn't mention this. I'm a little worried about the trail conditions heading down to the bayou." I sat up, listening to the gentle but persistent rainfall. "Maybe we should wait it out, see if it clears by midday?" "Maybe," she agreed, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. Every hour of daylight was precious for photography. By noon, the rain had indeed lessened to a drizzle, but a heavy mist had settled over the forest, giving everything an otherworldly quality. We decided to press on, following the trail that would lead us down toward Tensas Bayou. I was glad we'd invested in good rain gear. The moisture seemed to permeate everything, hanging in droplets from leaves and branches, soaking into the earth beneath our boots. The trail became less defined as we descended, sometimes disappearing entirely among the increasingly swampy terrain. Several times we had to backtrack, consulting both the paper map and the digital one Elise had downloaded onto her phone before we lost service. "We should be getting close," she said, frowning at the screen. "The bayou should be just ahead." But just ahead seemed to stretch on indefinitely. The mist thickened as the afternoon wore on, reducing visibility to maybe 20 yards at best. The trees around us grew larger, older, enormous cypress with flared bases and knees protruding from the boggy soil. Spanish moss hung in long beards from their branches, swaying slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. The beauty was undeniable, but so was the growing sense of isolation. It felt as if we'd stepped into another time, a primeval Louisiana before roads and ranger stations and carefully marked trails. Elise stopped frequently to photograph, entranced by how the mist transformed the landscape into something from a fairy tale, or perhaps a nightmare. "This is incredible," she breathed, adjusting her camera settings to capture a particularly ancient-looking cypress, its trunk twisted like a tortured spirit. The light diffusion through this mist. I couldn't have asked for better conditions. I didn't share her enthusiasm. Something about this place, the mist, the silence that seemed to absorb our voices, the way landmarks looked different every time I glanced back, it all made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I found myself checking our back trail obsessively, unable to shake the feeling that the path behind us was somehow changing. We finally reached what appeared to be the bayou itself. A wide, still expanse of dark water, its surface occasionally broken by partially submerged logs or the knobby knees of cypress trees. The mist hung heavier here, drifting in lazy tendrils across the water's surface. "This is it," Elise whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Tensas Bayou." She was right, it was breathtaking. The ancient trees rose from the water like sentinels, their reflections creating perfect mirrors in the still surface where it wasn't obscured by mist. There was a silence here that felt older than humanity, broken only by the occasional plop of a water droplet or the distant call of some unseen bird. We found a relatively dry spot on a small rise that offered a panoramic view of the bayou. Elise immediately set up her tripod, her expression one of intense concentration as she worked to capture the ethereal scene before us. I busied myself finding a suitable place for our tent, grateful for the small tarp I'd packed as an extra ground cover against the damp earth. "We should collect firewood before it gets too dark," I suggested once the tent was secure. "Everything's so wet, it might be hard to find enough dry kindling." Elise nodded absently, still focused on her photography. The light was changing as afternoon waned, creating new shadows and highlights for her to capture. "I'll help in a bit. Just want to get a few more shots while the light's like this." I wandered a short distance from our campsite, keeping the bayou to my right so I wouldn't lose my bearings in the mist. The forest floor was soggy, my boots leaving deep impressions that slowly filled with water. Despite the damp conditions, I managed to find some relatively dry wood under the denser evergreens where the canopy had provided some shelter from the rain. As I gathered fallen branches, I couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. Several times I paused, scanning the misty woods around me, but saw nothing beyond the endless trunks and hanging moss. Still, the feeling persisted, a prickling awareness at the back of my neck, an instinct older than reason. I was about to head back to camp when I noticed something through the trees, an unnatural shape, angular and weathered. Curiosity overcoming caution, I moved closer, my arms full of firewood. It was a cabin, small, listing slightly to one side, its cypress planks silvered with age. A narrow porch sagged along the front, and small windows, their glass long gone, gaped like empty eye sockets. The door hung partially open on rusted hinges, revealing darkness within. My first instinct was to retreat, remembering the ranger's warning about local structures. This had to be one of the Abelard family properties he'd mentioned. But something about the cabin held me in place, a sense that it contained answers to questions I hadn't yet formed. "Hello," I called, immediately feeling foolish. The cabin was clearly abandoned, possibly for decades. No one would answer, except someone did. It wasn't a voice, exactly. More a sound, a slow creak of weight shifting on old boards coming from inside the darkened doorway. I dropped the firewood, heart suddenly hammering in my chest. Is someone there? My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the mist. Silence answered, heavy and expectant. I took an involuntary step backward. The rational part of my brain supplied logical explanations. Settling timbers, an animal seeking shelter, the natural noises of an old structure. But some deeper instinct screamed a warning I couldn't ignore. I turned to leave, to hurry back to Elise and our campsite, when something caught my eye. A flicker of movement at one of the empty windows. Just for an instant, I thought I saw a face. Gaunt, pale, with eyes too large and too dark for a human countenance. But in the next moment there was nothing but shadow and mist. I ran. The firewood forgotten. I splashed through puddles and ducked under low-hanging branches, no longer caring about keeping the bayou as a reference point. Pure animal panic drove me forward until, by sheer luck more than navigation, I emerged at our campsite, breathless and wild-eyed. Elise looked up from her camera, alarm spreading across her features at my appearance. Thomas, what happened? I struggled to catch my breath, suddenly aware of how crazy I would sound. What could I say? That I'd seen a face that wasn't quite human in an abandoned cabin. That I'd fled from a creaking floorboard like a frightened child. I think I found one of those cabins the ranger warned us about, I managed finally. The Abelard places. Startled myself, that's all. Her expression softened with understanding, maybe even a touch of amusement. City boy, she said again, but gently this time. Did you at least find some dry wood before you scared yourself? I forced a laugh, embarrassed by my reaction. Left it behind when I realized where I was. I'll go back for it. I'll come with you, she offered, securing her camera in its waterproof case. I'd like to see this cabin anyway. Might make a good subject in this light. No, I said, too quickly. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. I mean, the ranger was pretty clear about respecting private property. We should stay away. She studied me for a moment, clearly sensing there was more to my reaction than I was letting on. But she didn't press. Okay, we'll find wood elsewhere, but if you point out where it is, I might just take a few exterior shots from a distance. For context. I nodded, relieved she wasn't insisting on exploring the cabin up close. Together, we gathered enough wood for a modest fire, though everything was so damp that getting it started proved challenging. As the daylight began to fade, the mist thickened further, reducing our visibility to just a few yards beyond the campfire's glow. We ate our dinner in relative silence, the events of the day and the weight of the mist dampening conversation. The usual night sounds of the forest seemed muffled, creating an unnerving quiet broken only by the occasional pop from our struggling fire. Do you think we're the only ones out here? Elise asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. The question sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the evening dampness. The ranger didn't mention any other permits issued, I said carefully. Why do you ask? She shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. Just a feeling, like we're being watched. So she felt it too. The knowledge should have been validating, but instead deepened my unease. If it wasn't just my city-bred paranoia playing tricks on me. Probably just wildlife, I suggested, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We are in their territory. Elise nodded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. After a moment, she reached for her camera again, scrolling through the day's photos. Want to see what I got today? Grateful for the distraction, I moved closer as she showed me image after image of the misty bayou. Her talent was undeniable. She had a way of capturing light and atmosphere that transformed mere landscape into emotion. The photos were beautiful but also unsettling in their emptiness. No wildlife, no people, just ancient trees and mist and dark water. These are incredible, I said honestly. Thanks. I think tomorrow I'll try to capture some of the sunrise light on the water if this mist ever lifts. We extinguished the fire carefully before retreating to our tent. Inside, cocooned in our sleeping bags, the sounds of the bayou night seemed both distant and too close. I lay awake long after Elise's breathing had deepened into sleep, listening to the occasional splash from the water, the creak of branches overhead, and, was I imagining it, the faint sound of footsteps circling our campsite. Just wildlife, I told myself firmly, just the normal sounds of the bayou at night. But when I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, my dreams were filled with that too gaunt face at the cabin window, and eyes that reflected no light at all. I awoke to silence. Complete, absolute silence. No birdsong. No insect buzz. No gentle lapping of water against the shore. Nothing. Next to me, Elise still slept, her face peaceful in the gray light filtering through the tent fabric. Outside, the mist pressed against our shelter like a living thing, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. It was as if we'd been transported during the night, set adrift in a sea of fog with no landmarks, no reference points. I checked my watch. 6:42 a.m. We'd planned to be up at dawn for Elise to catch that morning light she wanted, but I hadn't had the heart to wake her after the long hike yesterday. Now, looking at the dense mist, I wondered if there would be any light worth capturing at all. Careful not to disturb her, I unzipped my sleeping bag and pulled on my boots. The interior of the tent was damp with condensation, droplets forming on the ceiling and occasionally falling when the fabric shifted. Everything felt clammy. Our clothes, the sleeping bags, my skin. I needed to answer nature's call, so I quietly unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The mist was even thicker than it had appeared from within, swirling around my legs and reducing the world to a gray void. I could barely make out the remains of our fire from the night before, just a few yards away. The bayou itself was invisible, though I knew it lay only 20 yards or so beyond our campsite. Moving carefully to avoid tripping over exposed roots or uneven ground, I walked a short distance into the trees to find some privacy. The silence was oppressive, unnatural. Even my footsteps seemed muted, the soggy ground absorbing all sound. As I was returning to camp, I heard it, a soft, melodic humming coming from somewhere in the mist. A simple tune, almost a lullaby, but with discordant notes that made my skin crawl. It seemed to move, circling around me as I stood frozen among the trees. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding flat and dead in the mist. The humming stopped abruptly. Then, just as I was convincing myself I'd imagined it, a voice spoke. Close, too close, though I could see no one through the fog. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was female, with a thick Cajun accent, the words flowing together like molasses. "This ain't a place for visitors." I spun, trying to locate the source. "Who's there? We have permits. We're not trespassing." A soft laugh like dry leaves rustling. "Permits?" From them, government men who think they own what can't be owned. She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Abelard land runs deep, deeper than their papers know." My blood ran cold. One of the Abelards? Had I unknowingly ventured near their property again? "We meant no disrespect," I said, straining to see through the mist. "We're just photographers, interested in the bayou." "The bayou?" She pronounced it differently, with emphasis on syllables that changed its meaning somehow. "It takes more'n it gives, Cher, especially when the mist comes." A shape began to form in the fog, a silhouette that shifted and wavered as if it wasn't quite solid. I took an involuntary step back. "What do you mean?" I asked, my mouth dry with fear. "Some who come to these waters don't leave, or they leave different, changed." The shape moved closer and I could almost make out features. A thin face, long hair hanging in damp strings. The mist of Ten says, "She's old magic, old as the trees. She takes what she wants." I wanted to run, to rush back to the tent and Elise to pack our things and leave this place immediately. but I stood rooted to the spot, as if the soggy ground had reached up to hold my feet. "What does it want?" I whispered. The figure was clearer now. An elderly woman, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like layers of tattered clothing. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes dark pools that reflected nothing. Not a supernatural creature, I told myself. Just a local. Possibly trespassing herself, or maybe living off the grid in one of those cabins. "Sometimes just a memory," she said, her voice softening. "Sometimes more. A life for a life. That's the old way." Before I could respond, she reached out one gnarled hand. I flinched, but she merely pointed past me toward our campsite. "Your woman. She has the sight in her. The mist likes that. Hungry for it." I turned instinctively to look back toward the tent, though I could see nothing through the fog. When I turned back, the old woman was gone. Or rather, the mist had thickened where she stood, swirling in a vortex that gradually dispersed, leaving nothing but empty air. I stumbled back to camp, heart pounding. Elise was just emerging from the tent, stretching in the gray morning light. "There you are," she said, smiling. "I was about to come looking for you. This mist is amazing, isn't it? So atmospheric." I stared at her, wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. The old woman's warnings echoed in my mind, but in the relative normality of our campsite, with Elise's familiar presence, they seemed absurd, the product of too many ghost stories and an overactive imagination. "Yeah, atmospheric," I agreed weakly. "Listen, I'm thinking maybe we should head back today. The weather's not great for your photos and—" "Are you kidding?" She gestured around us. "This is perfect. The mist, the stillness. It's exactly what I was hoping for. Look." She showed me her camera's display, scrolling through early morning shots she must have taken before I woke. The images were hauntingly beautiful, tendrils of mist curling around ancient trees, the water a perfect mirror where visible. But there was something else in a few of the frames. A darkness at the edges that wasn't quite shadow, shapes that suggested figures watching from between trees. "Did you see anyone out there?" I asked carefully, pointing to one particularly unsettling image. Elise frowned, studying the photo. "No, just a trick of the light. Why?" I hesitated. Should I tell her about the old woman? About the cabin? But what if I had imagined it all? The last thing I wanted was to ruin her trip with baseless fears. "No reason," I said finally. "Just thought I saw something move earlier." She shrugged. "Probably wildlife. Speaking of which, I want to try to get some shots deeper in the bayou. There's supposed to be a stand of 1,000-year-old cypress about a half-mile from here." My stomach knotted at the thought of going deeper into this place, especially after the old woman's warnings. But Elisa's excitement was palpable, her eyes bright with anticipation. This trip meant so much to her career, to her passion. How could I take that away based on what might have been a waking dream? "Okay," I agreed reluctantly. "But we stick together, all right? This mist makes it too easy to get disoriented." She kissed me quickly. "Deal. Let me just grab my gear." We ate a quick breakfast of energy bars and instant coffee before setting out, leaving our tent and most of our supplies at the campsite. Elise marked our location on her phone's GPS, though I wasn't confident it would help much if we truly got lost. The mist seemed to confuse electronic devices as much as human senses. Walking along the edge of the bayou was treacherous. The ground was a patchwork of semi-solid earth and hidden pools of water. Several times, one of us would step into what looked like solid ground, only to sink ankle-deep in muck. The cypress knees, those strange knobby protrusions from the root systems, created an obstacle course that required careful navigation. Despite these challenges, Elise was in her element, stopping frequently to photograph particularly striking scenes. The mist had actually thinned slightly as the morning progressed, allowing beams of sunlight to penetrate in places, creating ethereal spotlights on the water and trees. We'd been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when we came upon it. A massive cypress, wider than any we'd seen before, its base flaring out into the water like the spread skirt of a massive dress, its trunk twisted upward, gnarled and ancient, branches reaching out in all directions, draped heavily with moss that swayed in a breeze we couldn't feel. "Oh my God," Elise breathed, already raising her camera. "That has to be one of the oldest trees in the refuge." It was undeniably impressive, but something about it made me deeply uneasy. Unlike the other trees, which seemed to exist in harmony with their surroundings, this one felt intentional, as if it had grown there for a purpose or had been shaped by something other than natural forces. As Elise circled the giant cypress, photographing it from various angles, I noticed something half hidden among the flared roots at its base. A small structure, almost like a shrine. Crude wooden figures stood arranged around a central object that gleamed dully in the filtered light. "Elise," I called, pointing. "Look at that." She approached carefully, her camera already capturing the scene. "It's an offering," she said, her voice hushed with excitement. "Some kind of local folk tradition, maybe?" The figures were roughly carved, humanoid but with exaggerated features. Elongated limbs, oversized heads, faces that were little more than gouged suggestions of eyes and mouths. The central object was a small bowl, filled with what looked like dark liquid. "We shouldn't touch it," I warned as Elise crouched for a closer look. "Of course not," she agreed, though her tone was distracted as she adjusted her camera settings. "But this is incredible. Cultural documentation is just as important as nature photography." As she took her photos, I scanned our surroundings, unable to shake the feeling that we were intruding on something private, something not meant for outsiders' eyes. The mist shifted and swirled around us, occasionally parting to reveal glimpses of the bayou beyond, then closing again like a theater curtain. "Done," Elise announced finally, straightening up. "This is going to make an amazing sequence. The juxtaposition of natural and human elements, the mystery of it." Her voice trailed off as she looked at me, her expression changing from excitement to concern. "Thomas, what's wrong?" I realized I was standing rigid, my hands clenched at my sides, every muscle tense. "Nothing," I lied. "Just, let's keep moving." We continued along the bayou's edge, but the sense of being observed grew stronger with each step. The mist began to thicken again, reducing visibility and muffling sound. Several times I thought I heard that same humming from earlier, but when I stopped to listen, there was only silence. After another 15 minutes of careful progress, we reached what must have been the cypress stand Elise was looking for. A group of enormous trees rose from the water, their reflections creating a disorienting mirror effect where water met mist. Despite my unease, I had to admit it was spectacularly beautiful. Elise was already setting up her tripod, her expression one of intense focus as she worked to capture the scene. I hung back, watching her work, trying to ignore the growing dread in the pit of my stomach. That's when I noticed it, a subtle movement in the mist between two distant trees, a figure walking slowly along the shore. Not the old woman from earlier, but someone taller, broader, a man, perhaps, though the mist made it hard to be certain. "Elise," I whispered urgently, "there's someone over there." She glanced up briefly from her viewfinder. "Where?" I pointed, but the figure had vanished, or rather, the mist had closed around where it had been, leaving nothing but gray emptiness. "I don't see anyone," she said, returning to her photography. "Probably just the mist playing tricks on your eyes." "It wasn't a trick," I insisted, my voice sharper than I intended. "I saw someone. They were watching us." Elise lowered her camera and gave me her full attention, her expression concerned. "Thomas, are you okay? You've been jumpy since yesterday." I ran a hand through my damp hair, feeling foolish but still certain of what I'd seen. "I'm fine. It's just this place. Don't you feel it? Like there's something not right here?" She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I feel something," she admitted, "but not wrong, exactly. More like old, powerful. It's why I wanted to come here, Thomas. Places like this, they have a presence you can't find in the city." "That's what worries me," I muttered. She sighed and began packing up her camera gear. "Look, I've got some great shots. If you're really uncomfortable, we can head back to the campsite." I felt a surge of relief, followed immediately by guilt. This trip was for her, not me. "No, it's fine. Take your time. I'm just being paranoid." She shook her head. "You're not. You're responding to this place, which is exactly what it wants. That's what wild places do. They make us feel small, make us remember that there are things older and more powerful than our modern lives." She smiled, touching my cheek gently. "It's good for us." I wasn't so sure, but I nodded anyway. As she resumed her photography, I continued to scan our surroundings, watching for any movement in the mist. We spent another hour at the cypress stand, with Elise capturing dozens of images from different angles. Despite my vigilance, I saw no further signs of the figure I'd glimpsed earlier. By the time we started back toward our campsite, some of my tension had eased, replaced by a growing sense of foolishness. Maybe it had been a trick of the light, a shadow cast by swirling mist. The walk back seemed longer somehow, the landmarks less familiar than they should have been. Twice we had to consult Elise's phone GPS to confirm we were heading in the right direction. The mist thinned and thickened unpredictably, sometimes allowing us clear views of the bayou, other times closing in until we could barely see a few feet ahead. "That's strange," Elise said suddenly, stopping to check her phone again. "According to this, we should be right on top of our campsite." I looked around, seeing nothing but trees and water and mist. No tent, no fire ring, no sign that we'd camped here at all. "Could the GPS be off?" I suggested, though I already knew that was unlikely. Even with poor signal, it shouldn't be this far wrong. Elise frowned, turning in a slow circle. "Maybe we're just a little off course. Let's check over there." We spent the next 20 minutes searching in an ever-widening spiral from where the GPS indicated our camp should be. There was no sign of our tent, our supplies, or the clearing we'd occupied. It was as if they'd never existed, or as if the landscape itself had shifted while we were gone. "This isn't possible," I muttered, panic beginning to rise in my chest. We couldn't have gotten that lost. Elise's usual confidence had faltered, her expression uncertain as she continued to check her phone. "The signal's getting weaker, but it still says we're right where we should be." I was about to suggest we try backtracking again when I heard it. The humming, that same discordant melody from earlier. But this time, it wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from the water. We both turned toward the bayou. The mist was thinner there, curling along the surface like smoke, and in the middle of the water, perhaps 30 yards out, stood a figure. Not on a boat, not swimming, standing on the water's surface as if it were solid ground. "Oh my God," Elise whispered, already raising her camera instinctively. The figure was female, tall and unnaturally thin, wearing what looked like a long white dress that floated on the water around her. Even at this distance, I could see that her hair was long and dark, hanging wet and heavy past her waist. She seemed to be looking directly at us, though her face was obscured by distance and mist. And she was humming, that eerie, almost familiar melody that made my skin crawl. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Elise's arm. "Now." But Elise was transfixed, her camera clicking rapidly as she captured image after image. "Do you see that?" she breathed. "She's standing on the water. That's impossible." "Exactly why we should get out of here," I insisted, tugging harder. "Please, Elise." The humming grew louder, more insistent. The figure began to move, not walking exactly, but gliding across the water's surface, heading directly toward us. That broke the spell. Elise lowered her camera, her face suddenly pale. "You're right. Let's go." We turned and ran, no longer concerned with finding our campsite, focused only on putting distance between ourselves and whatever was following us from the bayou. The mist seemed to respond to our fear, thickening around us, making it nearly impossible to see where we were going. Branches whipped at our faces, roots and cypress knees threatened to trip us with every step. I had no idea which direction we were heading, only that it was away from the water. My lungs burned. My legs ached, but the humming followed us, growing neither louder nor softer, as if it were keeping pace exactly. "Thomas, wait," Elise gasped finally, stopping to lean against a tree. "I can't. Need to catch my breath." I paused beside her, listening intently. The humming had stopped. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the occasional drip of water from leaves overhead. The mist swirled around us, revealing little of our surroundings. "I think we lost it," I whispered, not entirely convinced. Elise nodded, still breathing hard. "What was that, on the water?" I shook my head. "I don't know. Some kind of local legend, maybe?" But even as I said it, I knew no legend could explain what we'd seen. A woman standing on water, moving without disturbing the surface. "My camera," Elise said suddenly, checking the device hanging from her neck. "I got pictures. We can see." She stopped, staring at the display screen. I moved closer to look over her shoulder. The screen showed nothing but gray blankness, image after image of undifferentiated mist. No figure, no bayou, nothing. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I saw her. I know I got those shots." The implications made my blood run cold. Either we'd both hallucinated the same thing, or whatever we'd seen didn't show up on film. Neither option was comforting. "We need to find our campsite," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Grab our gear and get out of here. Head back to the ranger station." Elise nodded, her earlier enthusiasm completely gone. She checked her phone again, but the screen remained dark. "Battery's dead," she reported, her voice tight with fear. "It was at 60% a few minutes ago." I checked my own phone and found the same. A device that had been nearly fully charged now showed no signs of life. Whatever was happening in this place, it seemed to affect our electronics. "We'll have to navigate the old-fashioned way," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "The sun's that way." I pointed to where a slightly brighter patch showed through the mist. "So that should be west, which means the trail back is roughly in that direction." I pointed perpendicular to my first indication. It was a guess at best. The mist obscured the sun enough that I couldn't be certain of direction, but we needed something to go on, and Elise seemed to draw some comfort from my attempt at orientation. We set off, moving more cautiously now, staying close together. After about 10 minutes of careful progress, the trees began to thin and the ground became firmer underfoot, a good sign that we were moving away from the bayou and back toward higher ground. And then, through the mist, I saw it, the cabin from the day before. The same weathered cypress planks, the same sagging porch, the same partially open door. But this time, there was smoke rising from a crude chimney on one side, curling up to join the mist overhead. I stopped abruptly, Elise nearly running into me from behind. "Thomas, what is it?" "That cabin," I whispered. "The one I told you about. But yesterday it was abandoned. Now there was smoke, signs of habitation. Someone, or something, was inside." Before I could suggest we find another route, the cabin door swung open fully. A figure emerged onto the porch. The old woman from that morning, her thin frame draped in layers of mismatched clothing, her white hair wild around her deeply lined face. "Told you," she called, her voice carrying easily through the mist. "Told you she has the sight. Told you the mist would want it." Elise gripped my arm. "Who is that? What is she talking about?" The old woman cackled, a sound like dry branches breaking. "She don't know?" She addressed me directly. "You didn't tell her what the mist of Tenses takes from those who look too deep?" "We're just trying to find our way back to the trail," I called, keeping my voice as steady as possible. Our campsite disappeared. Can you help us? She descended the porch steps with surprising agility for someone who appeared so ancient. Campsite didn't disappear, Cher. The bayou moved it. Happens when the mist comes. Nothing stays where you leave it. She approached us, and I felt Elise tense beside me. Up close, the old woman was even more unsettling. Her skin had a grayish cast, and her eyes were cloudy, the irises so pale they nearly matched the whites. Martine Abelard, she introduced herself with a slight nod. This, my family's land you wandering on. We're sorry, Elise said quickly. We didn't mean to trespass. We're just lost. Martine's cloudy eyes fixed on Elise, studying her with unnerving intensity. You the one with the sight, taking pictures of what shouldn't be seen, bringing it back with you. I don't understand, Elise said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. Bringing what back? The woman on the water, I guessed, remembering the figure we'd seen. You know about her? Martine's expression hardened. Delphine, my sister's girl. Been dead 50 years, but the mist keeps her. Keeps all it takes. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the damp air. What do you mean, keeps? The old woman gestured around us at the swirling mist that seemed to have thickened again. The mist of Tensas. It's old magic. Older than my people, older than any people. Those who die in the mist don't leave. They become part of it. And those who see them, really see them, with the sight. She pointed a gnarled finger at Elise's camera. They get marked. The mist follows them home. Follows them forever. Elise's face had gone pale. This is crazy, just local superstition. Is it? Martine asked softly. You saw her on the water. You took her picture. But the camera shows nothing, yes? Because she's not for keeping in little boxes. She's for taking with you in here. She tapped her own temple. How do you know what my camera showed? Elise asked, her voice barely audible. Martine smiled, revealing several missing teeth. Because that's how it always happens. The sight shows you what's real, but the proof disappears. Makes you doubt yourself. Makes others think you crazy. That's how the mist takes minds, bit by bit. Look, I interjected, desperate to steer the conversation away from these disturbing claims. We just need directions back to the main trail. Can you help us or not? The old woman regarded me for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Come inside. Need to wait for the mist to thin. It will. Come afternoon. Then I show you the way out. She turned and shuffled back toward the cabin. Elise and I exchanged glances. Every instinct told me not to follow this strange woman into her isolated cabin, but we were hopelessly lost. Our electronic devices dead, and the mist showed no signs of clearing on its own. We don't have much choice, Elise whispered, and she seems to know this place. That's what worries me, I murmured, but she was right. We had few options. Reluctantly, I nodded, and we followed Martine Abelard into her cabin. Inside, the single room was dimly lit by a combination of a small fire in a stone hearth and gray light filtering through the glassless windows. The space was cluttered but not unclean. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, shelves lined the walls holding jars of unidentifiable contents, and mismatched furniture was arranged around the fire. The air smelled of wood smoke, herbs, and something else I couldn't identify, something old and slightly sweet, like decay. Sit, Martine commanded, gesturing to a pair of wooden chairs near the fire. As we obeyed, she busied herself with a kettle hanging near the flames, pouring steaming liquid into 3 chipped cups. Tea, she explained, handing us each a cup. Keeps the mist from settling in your lungs. The tea was bitter but not unpleasant, with hints of mint and something earthier beneath. Despite my reservations, the warmth was welcome after hours in the damp chill of the bayou. You said your niece, she died in the mist? Elise asked after a moment of silence. Martine nodded, settling into a rocking chair across from us. Delphine was 16. Beautiful girl, headstrong. Went out on the bayou during a mist like this one, 50 years ago now. Never came back, not her body anyway. She took a sip of her tea. Her spirit, though, that stayed. The mist took it, kept it, like it keeps all who die here. And she's what we saw on the water? I asked, still skeptical but unable to dismiss what we'd witnessed. She walks the bayou when the mist is thick, calls to the living. Those who follow her voice don't come back. Martine's cloudy eyes fixed on Elise. But you have the sight. You saw her without hearing her call. That's why she marked you. Elise shifted uncomfortably. I don't understand what you mean by the sight or being marked. Some people see more than others, see through the veils between worlds. Your camera, she nodded toward the device still hanging around Elise's neck. It's your way of looking deeper, but it opened you to being seen in return. This is insane, Elise murmured, but there was a tremor in her voice. How do we know you're telling the truth? I asked, setting down my half-empty cup. This could all be some kind of, local trick to scare tourists. Martine's expression didn't change. Check your arms, she said simply. What? Your arms, both of you. Look. Confused, I rolled up my sleeve. My forearm appeared normal, perhaps a bit paler than usual due to the cold, but otherwise unchanged. Beside me, Elise did the same. I heard her sharp intake of breath before I saw it, a pattern on her skin, like a bruise but more deliberate. A handprint, fingers splayed, wrapped around her forearm. A handprint too small to be an adult's, more like a child's or a young teen's. I don't. This wasn't there before, Elise stammered, staring at the mark. How? Delphine's mark, Martine said quietly. She touched you when you took her picture. You just didn't feel it then. Elise looked up, her face drained of color. This isn't possible. Many things not possible in the world you know, Martine replied with a shrug. But in the midst of tenses, different rules. I examined Elise's arm more closely. The mark was undeniably there. 5 fingerprints and a palm, the bruising discoloration stark against her pale skin. Nothing I knew could explain its sudden appearance or its perfect, deliberate shape. How do we get rid of it? I asked, looking back at Martine. This mark, how do we make it go away? The old woman's expression softened slightly, something like pity crossing her features. You don't? Once marked, always marked. The mist has a piece of her now. She nodded toward Elise. It will follow. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. That's not acceptable, I said firmly, fear giving way to anger. There has to be a way to undo this. Martine was silent for a long moment, rocking gently in her chair, the wood creaking rhythmically. Finally, she sighed. There is a way, not to remove the mark, that stays forever, but to keep what it brings at bay. How? Elise and I asked in unison. A binding. Old magic, like the mist itself. Martine rose slowly from her chair and moved to one of the shelves, selecting several small jars. But it has a price. Magic always does. What kind of price? Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martine turned back to us, her cloudy eyes somehow seeming to see right through us. The sight. The binding would close your inner eye, the one that lets you see what others can't. You'd never see the mist spirits again. She glanced meaningfully at Elise's camera. And your pictures. They'd show only what ordinary eyes can see. No more looking beneath the surface. Elise's hand went reflexively to her camera. I knew without asking what this would mean for her. Her talent, the thing that made her photography special, was precisely this ability to capture what others missed, to find the hidden light, the deeper beauty or darker truths in her subjects. There has to be another way, I said. Martine shook her head. That's the balance. To stop seeing what marked you, you must stop seeing all such things. The mist doesn't make exceptions. and neither does the binding." Elise stood abruptly, moving to one of the windows to stare out at the swirling gray beyond. Her shoulders were tense, her breathing shallow. I wanted to go to her, to offer comfort, but I sensed she needed this moment alone with her thoughts. "What happens if she doesn't do this binding?" I asked Martine quietly. The old woman began mixing ingredients from her jars into a small stone bowl, her movements precise despite her age. "The mist follows her home, comes in through windows at night, carries whispers from Delphine, and others the mist has taken. The mark spreads, slowly." She glanced up at me. "You've seen those people in your cities, yes? The ones who speak to what no one else can see? Who tell stories no one believes? Many of them were marked by something. Not all by the mist, but by things like it." I thought of the homeless people I occasionally passed in New Orleans, having animated conversations with empty air, their eyes focused on things no one else could perceive. The implication made my skin crawl. "You're saying she'll go insane," I summarized bluntly. "Not insane," Martine corrected. "She'll see true things, things really there, but things no one else can see. Over time, the double vision breaks the mind. Can't live in two worlds at once." From the window, Elise spoke without turning. "I'll do it. The binding." "Elise," I started, crossing to stand beside her. "Are you sure? Your photography—" "Will have to change," she finished, finally looking at me. There were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I'd rather take ordinary pictures than lose my mind. Thomas." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But are we really believing all this? These marks could be, I don't know, some kind of allergic reaction or—" "You saw her on the water," Elise interrupted. "We both did, and now this mark appears exactly where I felt cold while taking those pictures. A cold spot on my arm I dismissed at the time. Too many coincidences, Thomas, and—" She hesitated. "This explains things I've experienced my whole life, things I've seen that no one else could see, things my camera captured that shouldn't have been there." The resignation in her voice made my heart ache. This gift of hers, this sight, as Martine called it, was part of what made Elise who she was, part of what I loved about her. The thought of her losing it, even to save her sanity, felt like a profound loss. "It must be her choice," Martine said firmly from where she continued her preparations. "Not yours." I knew she was right, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. "How does this binding work?" I asked, not releasing Elise's hand. "Simple enough. A poultice for the mark, words spoken, a token to carry." Martine gestured for Elise to sit again. "We'll take an hour, no more. Then the mist will thin, and you can leave this place." As Elise moved back to the chair, I noticed the mark on her arm had darkened, the fingers more clearly defined, as if whatever had grabbed her was tightening its grip. The sight strengthened my resolve. Whatever this was, it was real, and it was affecting Elise in tangible ways. The next hour passed in a blur of unfamiliar rituals. Martine applied a paste made from herbs and other ingredients I couldn't identify to the handprint on Elise's arm. She spoke words in a language that sounded like French but wasn't quite. Cajun patois, perhaps, mixed with something older. She tied a small cloth pouch on a cord around Elise's neck, instructing her never to remove it. Throughout the process, Elise remained silent, her face set in the expression of resigned determination. Occasionally, she would wince as Martine worked on the mark, but she never complained. As Martine had predicted, the mist outside began to thin as the afternoon progressed. By the time the ritual was complete, patches of blue sky were visible through the cabin windows. "It's done," Martine announced finally, wiping her hands on a cloth. "The binding will hold if you keep the token close. Never remove it, especially not near water or mist." Elise touched the small pouch hanging around her neck. "How will I know it worked?" "Look at your arm," Martine instructed. The handprint was still visible, but it had faded to a pale outline, more like an old scar than a fresh bruise, and as we watched, it seemed to fade further, though it didn't disappear completely. "And my sight?" Elise asked hesitantly. "Test it," the old woman suggested, gesturing to the camera. Elise raised her camera, focusing on a corner of the cabin where shadows gathered thickly. She took a picture, then checked the display. Whatever she saw made her shoulders slump slightly. "It's just shadows now," she said quietly. "Before, there was something else there. A shape. But now it's just an empty corner." I felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that the binding seemed to have worked, if you believed in such things, but also sorrow for what Elise had lost. The gift that made her special, that informed her art, was now gone, traded for safety and sanity. "The path back to the main trail is clear now," Martine said, moving to the door. "I'll show you, and your campsite. It will be where you left it. The mist returns things when it thins." True to her word, Martine led us through the now clear forest to a well-defined trail that I recognized from our first day in the refuge. From there, she gave directions back to our campsite, refusing to accompany us further. "This is as far as I go," she said firmly. "The trail doesn't welcome me like it does you park visitors." Before we parted, Elise asked one final question. "Why help us? If this is your family's land, why not just chase us off?" Martine's cloudy eyes fixed on Elise with that same penetrating stare. "Because you have the sight. Had it. Those with the gift shouldn't lose their minds to the mist. Too few of you left in the world already." She glanced at me. "And because he loves you enough to believe what he can't understand. That's rare, too." With those words, she turned and disappeared into the trees, moving with surprising speed for someone so elderly until the forest swallowed her completely. Elise and I stood in silence for a moment, processing everything that had happened. "Do you really think," I began, not certain how to finish the question. "That a ghost marked me, and an old woman performed magical first aid," Elise offered with a weak smile. "I don't know what to think, Thomas. I just know what I experienced." She touched the pouch around her neck. "And I know I feel different. Like I'm seeing the world through a filter that wasn't there before." I put my arm around her shoulders, and together we walked back toward our campsite, following Martine's directions. As promised, we found our tent and supplies exactly where we'd left them, undisturbed by whatever strange forces had prevented us from finding them earlier. We packed quickly and silently, both eager to leave this place behind. The afternoon was bright now, the mist completely gone, transforming the bayou into a picture-perfect postcard of natural beauty. But its charm was lost on us. We'd seen what lurked beneath the surface. The hike back to the ranger station passed without incident. When we reached our car, I half-expected problems. A dead battery, perhaps, or flat tires, but everything was normal. The ranger named Bill was nowhere to be seen when we dropped off our permit, just a different employee who barely glanced at us as we checked out. It wasn't until we were on the highway, putting miles between ourselves and the Tensas River National Wildlife Refuge, that Elise finally spoke. "I need to look at my photos," she said, her voice steady but tight with tension. "All of them. From the whole trip." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. "After everything that happened, I need to know, Thomas. I need to see if any of it was real." At the next rest stop, we pulled over. Sitting at a picnic table under fluorescent lights, surrounded by the comforting sounds of passing cars and distant conversations, we reviewed the images on Elise's camera. The photos from our first day were normal, beautiful landscapes, interesting details of plants and wildlife. But the images from the second day, when the mist had come, were different. Not because they showed anything supernatural, but because they didn't show much at all. Frame after frame of gray emptiness, occasionally broken by the vague silhouette of a tree or the suggestion of water. Nothing of the vivid, otherworldly beauty I'd watched Elise photograph with such enthusiasm. And the images from the bayou, when Elise had captured the woman standing on the water, they showed only unbroken mist over the water's surface. No figure, no indication that anything unusual had been present. But then we came to the last few photos, taken at the ancient cypress with the shrine at its base. These images were clear, untouched by the unnatural fog that obscured the others. And in one of them, focused on the crude offerings arranged among the tree's roots, there was something neither of us had seen in person. Among the wooden figures surrounding the central bowl, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a small doll made of twisted cloth and twine, a doll with dark threads for hair and tiny stitched eyes that seemed to stare directly into the camera. A doll wearing a miniature pouch around its neck, identical to the one Martine had given to Elise. We never spoke about it publicly. Who would believe us? We told friends and family that the trip had been productive but challenging due to poor weather. Elise explained the changes in her photography style as a deliberate artistic evolution, a move away from atmospheric effects toward more documentary approaches. But privately, between ourselves, we acknowledged what had happened. Elise kept the pouch around her neck, even as the mark on her arm faded to a barely perceptible outline. And whenever fog rolled in off the Gulf or mist rose from the Mississippi on humid mornings, she turned away, refusing to look too deeply into its swirling patterns. As for me, I've developed a new respect for the wild places of Louisiana, not just for their beauty and age, but for their secrets, the things they keep hidden in mist and shadow. I've learned that there are boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, veils that are better left unparted. And sometimes, late at night when Elise is sleeping peacefully beside me, I think I hear it. A soft, discordant humming coming from just outside our window. A melody that shouldn't be familiar, but somehow is. And I wonder if the mist followed us home after all, waiting patiently for that small leather pouch to finally wear out and the binding to break. I wonder if, someday, Elise will see again what the rest of us can't. And I wonder what will be waiting for her when she does.